Welcome back to MythVision, Dr. Kipp Davis's YouTube channel, and of course, this will make an appearance on Dr. James D. Tabor's YouTube channel. You're going to want to stay tuned. We're going for the jugular. We are wanting to give you what Mark is saying in the Gospel of Mark, what Matthew is saying in the Gospel of Matthew. I am being hype and emphasizing this because they do not say the same things everywhere. And then let's read them side by side. So let me introduce you to our guest today. Really, I'm their guest, depending on which channel you're watching this from. Dr. James D. Tabor, Dr. Kipp Davis, and Derek Lambert, host of MythVision. I figure we would start right out the gate, not wasting anyone's time. Quick promo. Subscribe to both of their YouTube channels, Dr. Kipp Davis, Dr. YouTube Tabor.
Might as well be, right?
I know. I'm trying to get right into this because there's too much to talk about today. Dr. James D. Tabor, go sign up MVP courses. Both of them have courses. I guarantee you there's going to be stuff in the future as well. If you haven't taken them, be sure to do so. Without further ado, I'm going to be a fly on the wall with the rest of the audience, keeping track of like super chats, comments, things like that, and allowing Dr. James Tabor to kind of lead the way, bringing up some visuals, and Dr. Kipp will interact with him. So, Dr. Tabor.
Okay, good to see you all. Welcome, everybody. I'm hearing a buzz. Are we okay? We're okay.
Sorry, that was somebody was trying to call me.
Oh, okay.
Eye on the wall.
Okay, so just one preliminary statement, and then I want to really demonstrate it with the visuals. That's, this is show and tell. We're going to go through the visuals quickly and have as much as 45 minutes to an hour then to analyze and talk about them. But the one thing I want to say that I'll just put out there in a kind of a controversial way, because you don't hear this so much from, say, very conservative or sincerely fundamentalist readers of the New Testament who want to respect the Gospels. I think that is their true motive in most cases, if they are sincere, and that is to read them carefully. And if you don't read them carefully and you think that it's a challenge of harmonization, okay? Harmonization is the enemy of the truth. You're going to see this. And it's actually disrespectful to the text and to whoever the writers were. If you want to call it Matthew, Mark, that's that's clearly what we're going to refer to them to. Whoever wrote them, we don't know necessarily, but that's for another program. So let's get started. And what I want you to note is a method that I'm using. And I think I can convince you. I've done this for years with my students, and I get students, very sincere Bible-believing students. They do fine when we go through this because they open their minds, they listen, and they realize that the approach we're using actually has more credibility than the gerrymandering approach that apologists also use, because they're not interested in the text as much as making it say something so it's not a problem. Well, we like problems, not because, we want to be troublesome, but because we want to solve the problems. We want to say, oh, wow, that's interesting. So let's go with we've got six slides, and we're going to go fast. So don't think, boy, they're just buzzing through these, because the idea is put it before you and then we can discuss it. So slide number 1 here. This is a so-called harmony of the Gospels, but that's not what it's really called. It's called Gospel Parallels by Throckmorton. It's in the public domain, so you don't even have to buy it. If you Google Throckmorton Gospel Parallels, you can get this actual book free of charge. And I hope you'll study it to your heart's content. Now, back off a little, Derek, because this is more of a visual. We're not going to read all of this. Okay. Notice something here, and you can't notice it without a slide like this. I don't care how much you read the Bible. It all kind of merges into your head, and it's like, let's see, did Mark say, oh, yeah, and Luke added that. Oh, yeah, I forgot, and Matthew has that. That's not what you need. Here's what you need. Just look at the slide visually. This is the account in Mark 6, 17 through 29 of the death of John. What do you notice as Matthew rewrites it? Now, you could say, well, what do you mean, Dr. Tabor? Matthew rewrites it. What if Matthew wrote first and Mark's filling it out? That's a possibility, theoretically, but it doesn't hold up when you look at the content. Now, Matthew is good at this, let me tell you. He's very good at it. Look how dense Mark's account is. Look at that. We're not going to read it. You know the story about the birthday party and all of this, and John being brought in, a banquet, and Herodias' daughter, and so forth. But if you read Mark, it's very, very full. People think Mark is shorter. Look at that. Is Mark shorter? I don't think so. Count the words. But if you start skimming Matthew, you'll see. Let's just go to verse 7, just as an example. And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, blank, 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 the daughter of Herodias died. Blank. We don't need to know her name. Why do we need to know her name? And so forth. So we go on through, and I just want you to get that visual. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us, here's a great example of, I'm going to give you the case that Mark wrote first, and now Matthew is rewriting it in a kind of a Cliff Notes version. I really think it is that. Most of the essential stuff is there, but it's more like, hey, here's the story. John got his head cut off, and, let's go on and move on to Jesus, who's also going to get killed. Okay, next slide.
All right. Bear with me. I got to unshare and reshare.
That's okay. These will accumulate. You'll see the effect in a minute as we go through. Okay. And notice we're being careful with the text. We're letting the text decide. Now, here we're going to look at the baptism of Jesus. Now, here we're going to see that Matthew does not shorten it. He lengthens it. But I'm going to go with the working hypothesis that look at the middle column down at the bottom of the first page, the baptism of Jesus, Mark 1, 9 through 11.
Can I zoom in on that?
Yes. Yeah, you can zoom in just so you can show both. Yeah, that's good. But Mark's only one line. Now, what's the problem here? Mark doesn't care about whether Jesus is sinned or not sinned. Remember, this is a baptism for remission of sins. Matthew's writing later, and he's going, Mark didn't really address something. So anyone reading this could say, well, I'm really glad Matthew came along and addressed it. But just keep in mind that Mark doesn't mention it. Now, there's nothing wrong with mentioning it, except Matthew is concerned that somebody might think Jesus is a sinner. I wonder why Mark isn't concerned with that. Now go to the other column. Okay. And here we need Luke too, because we're going to put Luke as a control. When you do an experiment, you have a control. What we're asking is, how does Matthew rewrite his source Mark? So here you see he adds this, like, oh, I can't baptize you. You should baptize me. And Jesus said, let's go ahead with it to fulfill righteousness. Okay, now let's look at the voice. Every movie I've ever seen follows Matthew. Every preacher I've ever heard from the pulpit follows Matthew. Why? Because it's a loudspeaker announcement. This is my beloved son with whom I'm well pleased. Tell the world. Do you realize if Mark put that in, his whole gospel would fall apart? Because in Mark, nobody knows who Jesus is. That's his. So Matthew doesn't care about the secret. Now you say, well, maybe the voice said both. You see what you're doing there? It's going to get worse as we go on. Hey, I have no idea what the voice said, but according to Mark, a voice came from heaven and said, you are my beloved son, with you I am well pleased. It's personal. Now notice our control. Luke also has Mark. He has no problem with that. Look what he puts. You are my beloved son. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Okay, look at Matthew. Matthew does have a problem with it because he's not interested in the secret. He's already told you Jesus is the Christ and given the genealogy and everything. Okay, next.
All right.
So keep that in mind. This is going to accumulate. You're going to begin to see a pattern here. Okay, this is my favorite. Oh, they're all my favorite, but this one is just great. Notice again the visuals. Go to the middle column first. This is an incident in Mark early on, chapter 2. picking ears of grain on the Sabbath. The issue is technically, can you harvest on the Sabbath according to Jewish law? The Pharisees say no. Harvesting and reaping is one of the things forbidden in Pharisaic tradition. And the disciples are picking grain on the Sabbath. Now, they get criticized, like, look at verse 2. Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? So Matthew has that, although he adds that they're hungry. Notice a little bit of human need coming in there. But if you notice how Mark handles it, he basically says, oh, you think we're breaking the law? Yeah, actually, we're just kind of following David. He broke the law. Did you know that he went into we're going to worry about who was high priest here. Notice Matthew takes out Abiathar. That's a detail. That's because Abiathar wasn't the high priest. And you go, oh, wow, he made a mistake there. But what is he concerned with? He's concerned with, okay, David broke the law. So notice what Jesus is saying. If you can get both columns in for a minute, just move it over a little,
Okay.
Derek, or reduce it. You're
Yep.
good at this. Now, notice Mark wants to put this in your lap and say, go figure it out. Mark wants you to have a problem with this. Picture it like this. You say, Tabor, you broke the law. And I go, oh, really? Yeah, David broke the law. Actually, I guess I broke the law. You see, he doesn't try to explain it. And then look at the ending, which notice in the second column, Matthew does not like and removes. Why doesn't he like it? Because he makes a totally different point. I'll get to Matthew in a minute.
Are we
So
talking
what is
about the
Mark's
upper
point?
right hand? Upper right hand.
Right
corner?
hand, upper right hand. I can
Okay.
actually see your cursor. Yep.
You're talking about in this
And he said to them, look, after he said, I broke the law. David broke the law. But let me tell you this, the Sabbath is made for people. I'm going to say people. The Sabbath's made for people, for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Son of Man can mean a human being. And in this context, I think it does. Now, Jesus is a human being. So he's saying, I'm a human being. My disciples are human beings. And we're allowed to do this. Why? Because the Sabbath is for good. Now, Matthew might believe that, but he decides to give another idea. It's so different. Look, he takes that out. He doesn't put the Sabbath was made for man. Now, here's our first example where harmonization would go so far wrong. Think of squeezing Matthew and Mark together. Okay, just go like this, like an accordion. You see what happens? Okay, you get Sabbath was made for man, but you don't get him removing it, so you have lost Matthew. And he doesn't have anything about, well, why is Jesus doing this? Matthew gives a totally different reason. Look at the top, Derek, of Matthew, of the second column, verse 5. He gives that first example of David, and then he goes, and what about the temple? Priests work on Saturday in the temple more than any other time, and it's no big deal. Why?
Here, right?
Why?
Here.
Because someone greater than the temple is here. You see what he's doing? He's saying the reason Jesus is okay because he is greater than even the temple. In other words, the authority of Jesus. Whereas Mark is saying the reason it's okay is because of the original meaning of the Sabbath. Notice again, Luke takes that out, but I think it's not because he doesn't particularly like it as much as his people aren't into these kind of what we call halakhic arguments, about Jewish law and so forth. So he just says, hey, Jesus said it, don't worry. Okay, next.
Okay.
Next, number
4, I believe.
3 or 4. Well, number 1 really wasn't a comparison, so of this. Okay, this is really great. You're going to love this one. What is the most difficult passage in Mark? Probably Mark 4:10 through 12. And when he was alone, those who were about him asked him, why are you speaking in parables? And he said, to you, this is the disciples, is given the secret of the kingdom of God. Okay, notice Matthew put secrets. So there's not just one secret. Wait a minute, there's a lot of secrets, right? But for those outside, everything is in riddles. Parable in this case means a riddle. I'm not going to tell you the real thing. You got to figure it out. So that they may indeed, whoa, wait a minute. Look over to the left, Derek. verse 13. This is why I speak in parables, because seeing they do not see. You see what he's done? He's got, this is Bible difficulty 101 with Mark. What does the Sunday school teacher say? Teacher, why does Jesus say he doesn't want people to understand and be forgiven? I thought he did. He goes, oh, he didn't mean that. What he meant was they don't see, and therefore, they're fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah about hard-hearted people that don't have the right spirit. But notice Mark says, no, they can't see. It's a test. In other words, you throw something out and it's a test. And notice Luke again. Look what Luke says. So that seeing they may not see. Do you see how Luke is a control? When somebody says, oh, well, maybe Matthew wrote first and then Mark made it more difficult, it almost always goes the other way. If something's missing, you saw about the Sabbath made for man, something is not clear, Matthew's going to solve it for you. He does it with the Q source, the to source. He does it all the time. I'll just throw this out just orally. It's not Mark. Do you remember that? Don't think I came to bring peace, but a sword and so forth. And you got to hate your father, mother, brother, sister, and so forth. Matthew says, that just means you should love God more than other people.
And
but that isn't what the original said. It said you got to hate them. You see what's happening? Yep. Matthew's the great harmonizer, or he likes to go through problems and make them easy. Okay, next. And Luke tends to follow Mark, except, as you're going to see now, when he really doesn't want to follow Mark either. And that's what we have here. I'm sorry to laugh, but I mean, really, if you harmonize these, you've lost them all. And we're going to go over that at the end. You've lost them all. You don't have Mark. You don't have Matthew. You don't have Luke. Isn't that a tragedy if you care about the scriptures? Okay, here is a great one. This is just blows me away. It's the first time Jesus is confessed. Look at the left side first, depending on how you're looking at it, the way we're looking at it. Jesus pops the question.
I also really like this one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Who do men say that I am? And Peter, the great revelation. Look at the last verse there in that column. You are the Christ. And Matthew even emphasizes that more. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Luke has a little bit different phrasing, but basically it's about the same. Now, go over to the other page, Derek, and all of a sudden, when you see this, you should have little flashing lights that go off and go, ooh, he usually shortens and abbreviates, but now he's putting a huge chunk of stuff in. And the reason he's doing that, let's go back to Mark, verse 30. Go on down, Derek. No, back, same column, verse 30. Go to the middle column. Right after Peter confesses, just stay with Mark, because I believe that's the original text of this story. He charged them to tell no one about them, and he began to teach them he's going to suffer and be killed and rise again. Look, notice verse 32. And Peter took him and began to rebuke him. What? And then Jesus turns and rebukes Peter and calls him Satan and says he's not even on God's side. Whoa. Okay, Matthew, to his credit, leaves that in. But look what he adds. Verse 17, up at the top of Matthew, second page. And Jesus answered, blessed are you. Yeah, before I curse you, I want you to know that you're in charge of the church and you're the Pope and everything, and whatever you say is it. Roman Catholic reading, excuse me. But you see my point? Now here's Luke. He's my favorite. He goes,
is this a case of like, when I'm like managing people in the past, I always give them compliments before I like give them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's looking at Mark and he's thinking, yeah, that is there. I don't want to take that out. He sort of respects Mark on some levels, but he wants to retell it or construct, just like the picking grain on the Sabbath. But he's not above taking it out if it's going to be a problem. You do not go around and tell people, oh, you want to know how to keep the Sabbath? Just do human good. That is not a good Jewish way to decide how to keep the Sabbath. Okay, so what does he do? Look at Luke. I love this. He just goes, I am not even stepping into that tangled mess. I
Yeah.
can see Matthew, I can see Luke. I'm just taking it all out and saying, hey, Jesus is going to suffer. Let's move on. You see that? No curse, no blessing, nothing. Now you say, but Dr. Tabor, I want to know like what really happened. I'm going to put them all together. You just lost them all. You see that? You lost them all. First, you don't have Luke. Luke doesn't put that. Say, yeah, but Mark has some of it and Matthew has some, and I'm going to have it all now. No, you've created a new gospel. You have created the gospel according to whatever your name is, Joe Blow. So now you've created the gospel according to Joe Blow. Mark didn't, that's not Mark's gospel. That's not Matthew's story. That's not Luke's story. Next. And then we're going to get into talking about the implications of this.
Right.
Is this the sixth one?
Yep. Why do you call me good?
Oh, yeah, this one's
This is
good.
a good one.
This one is good. Okay. And again, do you see how Luke helps us tremendously? It like a control, almost like, okay, here's Mark. Ooh, what is Matthew going to do with that? Ooh, what did Luke do? Oh, I see. He stayed with Mark, and he does. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, let's read the first two verses of Mark. And as he was setting out on his journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments. He just basically quoted the Shema and said, keep the commandments. Talk about good Judaism. What's the core of Judaism? God is one. God alone. Notice God alone. That's the refrain all through the book of Isaiah. I am the Lord. There's none beside me. I'm the Lord, and so forth. And keep the commandments. Now, we're not going to get into the commandments and go sell all you have. That's the point of the story. But what I want you to notice is, why does Matthew have a problem with this? Are you kidding? Jesus, you can't even call Jesus good, and yet I'm going to end my gospel and say he has all authority on heaven and in heaven and on earth, and you're to baptize in his name, and unless people come through him, there's no hope. Of course he's good. He's much more than good. He's very good. He's divine. He's the Son of God, born of a virgin. Okay, look at this. Why do you ask me about what is good? Well, I guess he asked him about what is good, but that's not what Mark has. Come on. Why do you ask me? One there is who's good. Well, that doesn't even make sense. Why are you asking me about good? Only God is good. So I can't ask you about good because God is good? Doesn't even make sense. First of all, it's badly done, wouldn't you say? Not to be critical here. Okay, look at Luke. He just keeps it. Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. So that, to me, again, illustrates the same point over and over and over. When we have three accounts, let's start back at the first. When we have two accounts, Mark and Matthew, Matthew's going to tend to abbreviate unless he has a problem. If he has a problem, he's going to pop in something that mitigates the problem, right? Like, well, priests can work because of the temple on the Sabbath, and Jesus is greater than the temple, so his disciples can work because they're serving him, and he's greater than the temple. Mark doesn't say anything like that, not even close. That's not his reason. Same here with Luke. So there you get the principles. If we just take those, it's really 6 examples, 5 from Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You can see, to me, it's incontrovertible that the text is moving from Mark to Matthew re-editing to Luke. And problem number 1 that so many fundamentalists do, and they're sincere, I think, in many times. I'm not sure all apologists are sincere, but I think many Bible readers are sincere. I was sincere. You were sincere. Kipp was sincere. I mean, we got on our knees and loved the Lord with all our heart, and still do in some understandable way, and others who want to follow the truth. And the motives can be very good. So we're not insulting people here. What we're asking is respect the text and read them carefully. And critical does not mean criticize, tear down. What did I tear down? I didn't tear down one thing as I went through. I chuckled a little bit because I can't get over how Matthew just jumps in there. Oh, well, But, if you go to Matthew's time, of course, he's going to push the idea of Jesus being good and great and greater than the temple. There's not a temple anymore. And he's trying to kind of forge a whole new religion that we know as Christianity. Mark is on the cusp of a little of that, but he still wants to keep it pretty sharp and pretty raw. And Luke sometimes follows Mark, other times he doesn't. But I didn't give you many examples of Luke. If we were doing Luke, you know what he does most of the time? Problem, remove. Problem, remove. Don't even discuss it. Like when Jesus tells the disciples, you don't understand. How are you ever going to understand anything? Take it out. Just don't even go through it. So he's not going to rewrite, Luke's not going to rewrite material in Mark that's too problematic. Matthew will tend to keep it, but then mitigate it with something he wants to say. So what I say is let each one have its own voice. We do that when we speak. We have 3 people here now, and you're letting me speak. You're not interrupting me. You're not saying, why are we doing that with the Gospels of all things? Why are we doing it with any text? If I'm doing the lives of Xenophon, the lives of Alexander the Great, Xenophon is one of the rest. I'm going to take the 3 sources I have, and I'm not going to merge them together and make one life of Alexander. That would be so foolish. Do you realize what a treasure it is to have Pseudo Callisthenes as well as Xenophon, and to have these lives of Alexander? Then we can compare, and we can, look at all the traditions and nuances and where they came from and what the dating is. That's the scientific, responsible historical study of the Bible. And once you get into it, you can end up believing what you want. What you decide is your faith is your faith. But don't violate the integrity of the texts that you claim you're respecting by essentially getting rid of all of them. And that's actually what happens. When preachers get up, I grew up in the Church of Christ. And how many times I got my Bible here, my black leather Bible. I get up in the pulpit and I go, okay, we want to consider Jesus' baptism today. Why don't we look at Matthew today? Let's go. And you go, what do you mean? Why don't we look at Matthew? Like what? He's kind of my favorite. Why do we want your favorite? This is what people do. I kind of like the way Luke puts this. Oh, do you? What is it? You should not get up and be teaching people, your proclivities and your leanings. You should get up and say, here is the text. I think sermons should be slides like this. And then what a great discussion you could have. Why did Jesus allow his disciples to pick grain on the Sabbath? One idea Mark had was because, the Sabbath should really be for human good. We find that in rabbinic sources, right? Another, it's more Hillel, if you know Hillel. What would Shammai say? I'm with Matthew. Actually, he wouldn't be with Matthew because he doesn't think Jesus is greater than the temple, but he'd love that thing about, the priest. Well, it's the temple. Come on. Of course they can work on the Sabbath. So that's my spiel, and I'm sticking to it.
Kipp, I know that you had questions to dive deeper with Dr. Tabor. And of course, again, shameless plug, James has a course on reading the Gospel of Mark as the Gospel of Mark. And he emphasizes and goes into a lot of really interesting things in Mark that you don't find in Matthew, and that are really almost shocking for those who've never actually.
Let me just add this on that point. We had 40 people sign up for Mark. Just your wife sent me the new names just recently. And we're not even pushing it. That was months ago, right? Last year. And now we're doing Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there's still such an interest. And I believe this program is going to cause a lot of people to sign up, maybe hundreds, who knows? It very well could. So it's going out everywhere, and I'm going to put it on my channel as well. And here's the thing, because we have, right now, I meet on Zoom with whoever is currently in the course I'm teaching. So it's Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And at the end of the month, on Saturday the 30th, if you sign up for Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can come to the Zoom meeting. you can hear it even if you can't come, because we record it and upload it as part of the course. But because I see this surge of interest, Derek, and you call me and ask me about doing this because of the riding the two donkeys that we can get into in a minute, which is a similar kind of thing that Matthew does. So I'm going to plan in April a special kind of reunion Zoom meeting for the old Mark students, the ones that have been with me for months, and invite all the new ones. And it doesn't matter when you sign up, you do it online. Same with Kipp's courses. You can start tomorrow, you can start next week, you can start, at 4 o'clock today or 4:30 when we get off. You can start anywhere. It doesn't matter. You work at your own pace. A lot of times people think when they talk about an online course, well, what are the dates? And, oh, I don't want to be behind. You won't be behind. You're never behind. Nobody's ever behind. So what am I going to do in the Zoom meeting in April? Just for Mark students, it's going to be a special. I'm trying to get the Dead Sea Scroll students and Kipp students to also sign up for Mark. That's what we're doing right now. So what am I going to do? Well, it's a secret. I'm going to do something so cool. Here's a hint. It involves Morton Smith. Okay. I'm going to set you straight on Morton Smith and the secret gospel. So
I just read an article about that.
I did too. Was it in the Atlantic or the
It's in the Atlantic. Yeah. It's
Atlantic,
Ariel
Pacific,
Sabar, my
or
friend
the
Ariel Sabar
Mediterranean
just wrote it.
magazine. So
Yeah.
okay, so thanks for
Very interesting.
And you're going to put the link to the
Yeah,
course. Yeah.
I'll put it out there now. Kipp, go ahead and take us into some of the controversies, questions.
Yeah, for sure. So now I think I got I got pulled into this. Thanks, Derek, because he's got donkeys on the brain right now.
Right.
And I did a long stream about what Matthew is doing with the story in Mark about his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. But this, just like going through that, I think it raises so many interesting questions about what on earth Matthew thinks he's doing in the first place, and why he's doing it. And one of the things that apologists always want to convince us of is that all four of these writers, whoever they were, who wrote Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John, they were just in lockstep with one another, right? So in places where they may say things differently, it's not because they had different ideas about what was going on. No. It's just, they there was always two donkeys in that story. It's just that it's just that Mark and Luke and John chose not to mention one of them, but there were always two there. So I'm always just really intrigued by and I think this is scholarship, right? As scholars, we look at a text and we're looking at the comparative literature, and we're going, whoa, hold on, that's different. Why is that different? What's going on here? What can we say about what Matthew's doing?
So we're actually trying to understand, not destroy. This idea, you're just trying to destroy. No, if you try to mush it all together, that's
going to wreck it.
Because you're going to say, well, first of all, the most donkeys will always win. If we had another gospel,
the most angels will always win.
Let's say the lost Gospel of Peter, because we don't have this part of it. But let's say we had the triumph entry, and he said there were 4 donkeys and 5 disciples rode them. Well, then you'd have to put that in too. That's not the way you read. You read Matthew as Matthew, Mark as Mark, Luke as Luke, and you try to ask what Kipp just said. And you actually have to look at the whole thing, like I do in the Mark course, or if I taught a Matthew course or so forth. And that is, what is their overall purpose? And I can tell you Matthew's right now. It's very simple. Guess what? It's the last verse. All authority and power belongs to Jesus Christ in heaven and on earth. And the mission of the church, he's the only gospel that uses church, the word church, ecclesia, twice. The mission of the church is to go and teach and baptize and make disciples until the end of the age. That's Matthew. That's not Mark. So that's not Mark's purpose.
Yeah.
Mark's purpose is to say, you know, this whole Jesus thing is very mysterious, and I'm going to let you, the reader, in on the secret teachings of Jesus that he only gave to his disciples. They never got it, not one single time. They're never praised, not one single time. Okay, never. What did Jesus say in Matthew? He praised it. Oh, blessed Peter, you're blessed, blessed. What great understanding. Well, how could it be great understanding if he calls him Satan and says, get behind me? I mean, come on. So you say, well, I could put all those together and get both. Well, then if you don't care about losing Mark, because Mark is very precious. You know what Mark does for you that Matthew doesn't do? He lets you figure it out. I'll tell you my favorite is after the transfiguration in Mark 9, the disciples go like, again, clueless. Wait, how could we be? This is the kingdom of God, the glory, Moses, Elijah on the mountain. That's what we're wanting to come right now. And it was a vision. They said, so let's go to Jerusalem and take over. And they said, but what about Elijah? Elijah's got to come. This is a prophecy in Malachi, the very last chapters of Malachi.
Yeah.
And he goes, Elijah already came, and they did to him what was written of him. Now, many people figure that's John the Baptist, and I think it is. But Mark doesn't tell you it's John the Baptist. You see what happens? You go, so here's Matthew. He does this all the time. It's John the Baptist.
Yeah.
You dummies. It's John. He does it again. No, here's my favorite. This is like when you forget scriptures. Like, I think it's in Isaiah or maybe Jeremiah. Oh, maybe Hosea. He quotes Daniel. In Mark 13, he alludes to Daniel, but he doesn't say Daniel. He says, as it is written, the desolating sacrilege will stand in the holy place. Let the reader understand. Reader of what? The Bible, the prophets. Where should I read? Should I start in Genesis 1:1? You know what Matthew does? He goes, as prophesied by the prophet Daniel. See how he helps out the reader? Now, there's nothing wrong with helping out the reader, except Mark doesn't want to help you out. He wants you to read it and you get all the explanations. You're supposed to figure it out. And then when you come to the last chapter, which I bet I surprised some of you, thought, Tabor's going to do Mark 16 and claim that was the original ending. Well, we could do that. But, I thought I would surprise you and do some things maybe you haven't looked at, because that's the one that's usually talked about. He doesn't have a birth story and he doesn't have resurrection appearances. That's true. And if you add them, you've lost. But you know what you've got to figure out when you read Mark? Why would he end it like that? He clearly believes Jesus was raised. And he even believes there are appearances, because he says, the guy in the tomb says, you will see him in the Galilee. So he's writing for a faith community that believes the faith was recovered in the Galilee. Luke has a real problem with that, because he does not want them even going to the Galilee. And in fact says in Luke and in Acts, do not leave Jerusalem until Shavuot or Pentecost. Well, if they don't leave until the 50 days later, obviously they're not going to see him in Galilee, unless they're going to have, telepathic vision or something.
Obviously.
So clearly, you see what happens when you do this? It does not destroy the text to respect them and read them carefully. So their purposes are different. Luke's purpose is totally different. Also, you can always find out the purpose at the end of every book. Look at the last verse. It's funny. This is what ancient books do. They kind of tell you their purpose at the end. So Matthew, Jesus' authority, power, he's with us. We're the church. We're preaching until he comes. So he doesn't care how long it takes, delay of the parousia, as we call it. He doesn't care. I'm with you till the end of the age. Say, how long is that? Till the end of the age. Could it be 2,000 years? Yeah, and it can also be 10,000 years. Still read that verse. What do you need to do? Preach, baptize, teach. What does Mark say? Yeah. Run from the tomb and be scared. I could be vulgar here, but just be scared senseless. Use another S word, because you have no idea the awesomeness of what has just happened. And Luke is more like, okay, you guys, you need to start in Samaria, in Judea, and then up to Antioch, and then go into Greece and to the ends of the world, and finally Rome. And that's, he's got a completely different idea to kind of Romanize and normalize it for the Mediterranean culture. And
No, it's
they're all different. I
oh
love
yeah.
the differences. And you know what? James Dunn
Yeah.
is one of the great evangelical scholars, passed away a few
Mhm.
years ago, good friend of mine. And we disagreed like crazy. You should see how he reviewed my Paul book. And I responded to him. It was in Bar Magazine. You can look it up or look on my blog because I reproduce it, jamestabor.com. But he, to his credit, said exactly what I'm saying. He's a believing Christian, and he said, you guys quit destroying the text. Nowhere in the New Testament is Jesus made God. That was James Dunn. He said, well, he
Mhm.
couldn't be evangelical. Yes, he was. He's talking about the one God, the Father, the Lord, Yod He Vav He. And he also says, read the Gospels critically. Because don't you want to get the original meaning? That should be the desire of any careful reader of the Bible, believer and unbeliever. You do it with every other book. We don't
Yeah.
slop all the things together. Imagine taking three
Yeah.
biographies of Lincoln, merging them all together, that you and then what are you going to publish that as your own work? Because you've just created something that none of those authors created. Maybe one author doesn't like Lincoln, and maybe another author idolizes him. We do have those biographies,
It
even of
becomes
yeah. So
it becomes an incoherent work then at
yeah,
that point. And it's a great point. I think it's a great point that you make about finding the meaning of a writing by carefully investigating how it ends. And this probably is also just like one of these great big, flashing clues to us, where we see so many of these ancient works, they end up being appended. A whole new ending is added to the
of course.
Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
Why? Because the first one doesn't work. You see it with the with the Hebrew scriptures too. You've got a whole new revised version of Jeremiah that ends completely differently
Yes.
than the Septuagint version. Because why? They need to change the meaning of the book. You see this in really troubling theodicies, like in the book of Job,
Mm.
or in the book of Ecclesiastes. You've got to fix the text, and the way you fix the text is to
Right.
is
And you're
to
gonna
is
get
to re-end them.
so much more out of Job, say, is a great example.
Um,
If you will get a good study Bible, I would
mhm.
recommend the Jewish Study Bible or the New Oxford Annotated RSV Study Bible, and read the notes and just consider them. And I
Yeah,
think you're going to come away not thinking, oh, they're just tearing up the text. They don't really believe it. You're going to come away with some great insights in terms of even the problem of suffering. Because if you read the more original parts of it, it has a completely different answer to why Job suffered.
totally different.
And it's
Yeah,
actually the answer that most of us live with every day when we
yeah.
think about theodicy and justice and what's the cosmos and what does it mean. It's a struggle. And essentially, we're silent before the vastness of the question. And other times, just jumping into Kipp's field, which is more Hebrew Bible, we're both Bible scholars, so we overlap. Bart always says, I can teach Hebrew Bible. I'm a Bible scholar. Well, I'm a Bible scholar too. I study with major people at Chicago in Hebrew Bible, like Gustav Ahlstrom, but, read Hebrew with him and so forth. One of my favorites is Isaiah 56, where the author's getting very worried that this house of prayer for all peoples is going to get a little bit generic. And I'm not even sure we need the temple. And Jeremiah says it's a den of shredders or
Yeah.
ripping animals apart. You've turned it into slaughterhouse, basically, he says. And so what does somebody add? And it's so obvious. Read Isaiah 56. They go, and your burnt offerings will then be acceptable. Wait, okay. I see. Okay. And Psalm 51, everybody knows that. It's David's prayer of repentance when he murders Uriah the
You're right.
Hittite and commits adultery with Bathsheba. And he has this wonderful prayer, have mercy on me, O God. Many people can quote it. It's very moving, very touching, prayer of repentance. And at the end, he says, I could bring sacrifices, but that wouldn't mean anything. And And then the last someone at the end put, build the walls of Jerusalem. After the ex, build the walls of Jerusalem, and then we will offer sacrifices. Like, don't read this and think that God doesn't want sacrifice, even though he says he doesn't, like in different prophetic passages.
Yeah.
So you need to let, I grew up in the Church of Christ, and let me give you a new phrase. This came from the Radical Reformation. You'll all know it. Speak where the Bible speaks. Remain silent where the Bible is silent. Okay? Remember that. What we just said. You say, well, I'm going to mush it all together. Well, then you're not remaining silent. Read Mark and remain silent. If Mark doesn't have it, read Mark. Speak where the Bible speaks. Speak where Mark speaks. Speak where Matthew speaks. You see, that is a conservative position. I'm sorry. I define liberal as sloppy, loose, doesn't really matter. Who cares about details? That's how we use the idea of liberal often. You're being kind of liberal with this idea. What about being more careful? And so I'm going to call all my conservative friends liberals. No, they're not. You got to respect the text. You got to respect the text. You think Mark doesn't know of appearances? Of course he knows of appearances. He chooses not to tell them. Have you ever wondered why? Instead of fixing him, you're going to fix Mark. I don't like it ending like that. Well, you weren't the author, were you? So why does it matter whether you like it? Because you're taking a different purpose than he had and putting that purpose on top of him. And that's why I call my course Creating Jesus, Why Mark's Gospel Was Forgotten. You say, well, it's not forgotten. You just went over it, Dr. Tabor. Yeah, but what's the part people remember? Blessed are you, Peter. They couldn't tell you if it was Matthew, Mark, or Luke. But she said, what did Jesus say to Peter when he finally confessed him and had this great insight? Find somebody that's going to, he called him Satan and said to get away from him. Nobody's going to say that. They're going to say he blessed him and he made him the head of all the apostles, right? So.
Nice.
Zero in on this because I know we only have James for another like 40 minutes.
Yeah. All right. So there's a couple things.
You jump in too, Derek. You jump in too. But go ahead, Kipp. Sorry.
There was a couple things that I wanted to sort of take a closer look at some of your examples there, and I think the first one is the story of John the Baptist, the beheading of John the Baptist.
That's number one. Let's put that up again.
Is that number one? So, and because as I read this,
not the baptism, but the death. You mean the death of John? Yeah,
the death of John the Baptist. Yeah,
he'll put that.
I should have been clear about that, shouldn't I? Sorry. Right. So as I read this, I'm looking at a lot of the stuff that Matthew's leaving out here, and I'm wondering if you think or what you think about some of this, because one of the things that struck me was this part here in Mark, like this part here in Mark 6:20. Well, starting at 19, Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and a holy man, that he kept, and it says there, he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was very much perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. And Matthew just doesn't want to have anything to do with that, does he?
That's a huge
problem. Talk about that. Talk about why Matthew doesn't want.
He thought John was a holy and righteous man. Herod Antipas? Are you kidding me? He killed him. Well, Mark's giving you the story there.
Yeah. So there's definitely like there's always I tend to think like there's often a polemic at work here behind a lot of these texts, where the writer of Matthew, it seems to me, is just, we've got to make Herod as reprehensible as we can in this.
Sometimes when he shortens things, another example is this story about healing the paralyzed guy in Mark. We won't put it up, it doesn't matter. But everybody remembers the story. They can't get in, it's so crowded. They take the roof off, they let the guy down. This will be good for our listeners and viewers to do. Go find that in Matthew. I'm not even going to tell you where it is. I know where it is, but I want you to go find it. Just thumb through and find the paralytic and read it, because you're going to be surprised. See, people have this stuff in their heads, like I did, if you grew up with it, and all of you three did too. You just got the stories in your head. So you don't know if it's Matthew, Mark, or Luke. If I go, what's that story about the paralytic? Like Kipp was like nodding his head. Yeah, I know the one you mean. But the version they have in their head is a composite, generally, of everything. And it tends to be the fullest story, which in this case is also Mark. And so Mark tends to do things that you don't need to do if you're telling a story. For example, don't go there again, but why does Herodias need to talk to her daughter, then her daughter go back and talk to Herodias, talk to Herod, and then talk to her daughter, then her daughter talk to Herod? And so why do you need all that? Just say, if you look at what Matthew did, he just said, don't go through all that. Just say, she asked for the head. Okay. So you could say, well, Mark's being fuller and more dramatic, but a lot of times it's not just fuller and more dramatic, it's to change the point. So with the paralytic, guess what? He strips it down to nothing. 4 men brought a paralyzed guy to Jesus. And he said, my son, your sins be forgiven. How can he forgive sins? Only God can do that. He goes, oh, you didn't think I should do that? Here, rise and walk. Matthew's only interest in that is, what did I say was the theme? The power and authority of Jesus. So he doesn't need, you say, well, was it crowded that day? Did they have to take the roof off? But you notice in Mark, it's an act of faith. It's one of the acts of faith that is praised in Mark. And he almost never praises anything, but he does praise that. Jesus saw their faith. That's why the guy's healed. Not because of Jesus' power. I mean, Jesus could do magic tricks, I guess, in Mark. That's okay. He walks on water, but that's not the point of that story. The point of the story is, and not even that he has authority. He says, well, look, that you may know I have authority, but he saw their faith. Well, Matthew just wants to emphasize the authority and power, and he does that every time. He does it. And the secret basically disappears. Like, why would you tell people not to tell what I did or what I said, and why would you give all these secret interpretations? Matthew just goes ahead and puts them out there. So you get so much more out of them on every level if you'll read them like we're suggesting. And then you can still work out your own beliefs and your own conclusions. But you're going to be, first of all, you're going to be interesting. And did you notice that line I put in the description, Derek, right at the end? And besides, this is more interesting.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Always,
don't you like things that are interesting? I don't want to hear somebody jumble everything up and just tell me something that they created. That's not interesting. I want to see if Matthew took something out, or if he added something, or if he multiplied something with. I want to know that.
And that's actually to the donkey point, Kipp, is that we've been looking at this. There are various scholars. Of course, Kipp's done more reading of some of the articles and commentaries from various scholars than I've had time to even do. But there was an interesting observation. I called our friend Stephen the other day, who's like an avid Greek and source. Yeah. He's like a scholar in his own right, autodidact on this stuff. And I said, there's that weird spot where Jesus is before Pilate, and there's Barabbas, and then there's Jesus in Mark, and it does not call him Jesus Barabbas. There's no early sources that call him Jesus Barabbas. Matthew inserts the name Jesus Barabbas, which just means, Jesus, son of the Father. It's a pun on the word, it seems, where they take and add the name Jesus, and then you have another son of the Father, Jesus the Christ, being like compared in a way. And he does something very interesting, clever, I think brilliant literary move to compare these two, one an insurrectionist and the other being a Messiah figure.
And he knows what he's doing. And he has those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And only Matthew has that. Only Matthew. So we know his point. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And then you look at the two demoniacs instead of one.
Two demoniacs, two donkeys, two Jesuses.
Right. So we wondered if you were on board with thinking, I don't know, I'm going to let Kipp take it from here, because I know you get into wondering if Matthew, how acquainted with the Hebrew. It looks like he's using the Septuagint when he's quoting. Go ahead.
Well, I've leaned towards, I watched Bart do that thing with you, and I've leaned towards towards the Hebrew parallelism, but I'm open to the other view as well, that he is fully, and he's not just stupid and doesn't know that. He's actually trying to play this double thing again. So
what do you
I'd love to hear what Kipp, he's been doing reading. What did Allison say? Can I ask you? Oh, you tell me. What did Allison say?
You go, Derek, about Allison. And we're
because I thought you called him and asked him, right?
I did, and he wasn't.
He was grumpy. No, he was. He said he was in a bad mood.
Putting together bibliography.
Yeah, he's putting some crazy bibliography together. But long story short, he didn't think that he made a mistake. He thinks it was purposeful, and that there's good other sources to possibly rely on to give the reason why rabbis would dual or double up things.
Yeah.
So he thinks he does know Hebrew parallelism, but he thinks that apologists are completely wackadoodle in thinking that there had to be two donkeys, even in Mark, even though it only mentions one. Like, they're trying to harmonize these two texts and not let Matthew just be Matthew, which our good friend Stephen, who is an apologist, went on record. I was shocked to hear him at least consider it, which is a big step. Remember what happened to Mike Lacona when he said the zombie apocalypse allegory? Oh, he got fired.
Well, zombie apocalypse is another dual. Notice when he dies, you have a resurrection. And then when the tomb is empty, you have a resurrection. Yeah. So it kind of it's proleptically looking at the final resurrection when all the saints rise and appear. You know, almost to say, hey, don't give up on the parousia. I know it's taken a long time. Matthew has 3 parables of delay added to the Apocalypse chapter in 24. 3 parables of delay. Remember? The guy takes a long time. Remember? And the wicked servant goes, oh, the master's delayed, and I'm going to start acting up and so forth. So I think that's double too, on purpose. How many other doubles? There's probably others we haven't noticed.
Exactly.
All over the place, right?
Yeah, I'd like to see that. But yeah, that Allison just gave his off the cuff. I think the nerdy question that Kipp has more is into literally the specifics. And I want to let you do that, Kipp, because you found some evidence that I don't think is being considered by our friend Stephen, for example, about what's going on and why that last sentence changed in Matthew's retelling of Zechariah 9:9.
Well, I think it's important at the outset. The reason I got into this was because, the apologists in the first place insisting that there was always 2 donkeys there. And then this further insistence that, there's a couple of things. There's this further insistence that Matthew had to know his Hebrew and knew it well because of how he handles the quotation from Zechariah 9:9. And there's certainly an argument to be made there, just because in that last line, and people can go back and watch the video that I did about this, where I unpack this in some pretty great detail. But there's certainly an argument to be made there that last line of the text looks like it reflects something closer to the existing Hebrew text that we have. So I don't know, maybe maybe Matthew was conversant with the Hebrew in some respect. One thing that I don't buy is this idea that he had, like a Septuagint version of Zechariah in front of him, and he's copying it literally quite rigidly. It's verbatim, and then he gets to the last line and he's like, no, I don't think so, and rummages around and pulls out his scroll of the minor prophets and rolls it open, his Hebrew scroll of the minor prophets, and rolls it open to Zechariah 9:9, says, I'm going to actually just translate that last line from here directly. I think that's not what's going on. And importantly, we just don't know.
Right.
But there's many ways to work through this question, and one of them in particular is the recognition, and this is something that I think Professor Emmanuel Tove has brought out with some excellent clarity when it comes to the texts of the Bible in the Second Temple period at the time of Jesus. One of the things that we see in particular from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we do have scraps of a couple of other manuscripts kicking around as well, is that there was no fixed version, right? We have varieties of these things floating around. And interestingly enough, so the Septuagint text, the one that we have published, the one I have up on my shelf, this is an eclectic text. So it's compiled from a variety of different Septuagint manuscripts. Interestingly enough, there's a whole bunch of them that look really different from one another. We have Greek translations of the Bible at Qumran. A small handful of these these Greek translations, and one of the things that we see with some consistency there, and this matches also with a very important Greek manuscript that was discovered at Nachal Hever, called the Greek Minor Prophet Scroll. One of the things we see there is a text type, a Greek translation of the text that's actually straining to get closer to the Hebrew text. So, and this seems to be a thing, right? This seems to be a thing that people were doing in in the first century. So,
Yeah.
for all we know, Matthew's just got a version of Zechariah written in Greek that is just doing what all these other Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible are doing, where they're straining to provide something of a more wooden, more literal. Did my wife just come home? I hear the dog whining. I don't think so. So, yeah. So that but where I land on this is, I think the question of whether or not Matthew knew Hebrew, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't think it's all that significant. The question of whether or not he understood Hebrew parallelism, whether he did or he didn't, I think it doesn't seem to make a big difference for him when it comes to this text. Again, it's one of those open questions. The things of significant are that Matthew's got to get 2 donkeys into this story. That's the really important thing here. And I think this is also significant because based on a plain reading of the text, and especially if you're going to treat the source critical question seriously, if you're going to look at what Matthew's doing with this story relative to what Mark does, and Matthew is reading Mark and then making these changes to Mark, it also seems to be pretty important that Jesus is sitting on both of them. I cannot escape that. There's an argument that the pronoun there, where it says Jesus, they set their cloaks on them, speaking of the donkeys in Matthew's version, and he sat on them. The apologetic argument goes here, well, we don't know, could it be the donkey, could it be the donkeys, could it be the cloaks? Well, if you look at that passage compared to Mark, it makes it pretty clear that Jesus is sitting on donkeys. And I just think, I've had this discussion a number of times now with various people because it keeps coming up, Derek, and I blame you for that. I blame Apologia for that too, but all you guys are to blame for this. It's taken over my life. But anyways, I just think that
Oh yeah,
when it
there
comes
you
to Matthew, right? I'm not sure because people are like, well, if he's sitting on two donkeys, that just doesn't make any sense. Use some common sense here. Of course, he can't be sitting on two donkeys. And at this point, I'm just like, I'm not sure Matthew even cares about
Right.
whether or not this makes practical sense. I just don't know if
Like, is
that's
he
his
actually
motivation
trying to
here.
make a historical? Is that?
I don't think
It's
he
almost
is.
like we start with the
I
wrong
think he's
assumptions.
I
Yeah,
think he's unbothered by the optics of this.
yeah, yeah.
But
let
that's
me
just me.
let me jump in
Yeah,
from Mark's
please.
standpoint. As I mentioned earlier, everybody has the text in their heads. So because Matthew adds the quotation from Zechariah 9:9, lo, your king comes to you, and so forth, humble, triumphant and humble, riding on the ass, and so forth.
Yeah.
Mark doesn't have that at all.
Nope.
He's got his motif of going to the village and you'll see this. And then that's going to lead to something important happening. He does it for the Last Supper. Go into the village and you'll see a man carrying a jug of water. Follow him. So it's the same motif. So they're at Bethany on the backside of the Mount of Olives. If you've been to Jerusalem, and some of you have, you'll know that when you come down the Mount of Olives from Bethany, you will end up pretty near the Gihon Spring, and then you go up and you go probably into the southern gate. That eastern gate is disputed, but clearly that's not the way you enter the temple. You go through what's called the Hulda Gate, means the mouse gate. It's these tunnels. And I'm not suggesting he rode the donkey a hole into the tunnels and up the steps, but to that point where you would dismount. I think if you look at what the crowd says, it becomes very interesting. They don't say, behold, your king comes to you. They say, blessed is the kingdom that is coming of our father David. Now, why would they say that? In other words, Matthew's the one that says, oh, wait, I got a text. Just like the virgin shall conceive, or the young woman. Just like out of Egypt, I've called my son. To him, it triggers, oh, maybe this is Zechariah, because Mark is his source. So what is Mark's source? Mark's source, I'll read it to you, I think, is 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 38. And what it says is that Nathan the prophet puts Solomon on a donkey and takes him down to the foot of the Mount of Olives and declares him king. Okay?
Yeah.
That's 1 Kings. So Mark's not even thinking of Zechariah 9. Because he doesn't say, behold, your king comes to you. You yell Hosanna, meaning the kingdom of our father David has now been restored. There's for the first time since the exile, you've got a Davidic figure, according to Mark, riding down on a colt to the Gihon Spring, and everybody's saying, hey, the king, the king. It's a repeat of the coronation of Solomon, who succeeded David. Now we have a new Solomon who's going to succeed David. And for Mark, he's going to build a new temple. Remember? He doesn't care about that old temple going down.
That's
so
right.
Mark has a totally different agenda, nothing to do with Zechariah. So the other thing that harmonist, what are they called? Harmonizers. The other mistake they're making is you're now reading Mark in the light of Zechariah 9 because Matthew added it. Don't do that. You might miss the point of Mark's story, that it's a repeat of Solomon. You see? And that's the only time we know of a king riding a donkey and getting anointed as king at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Just go down to the foot of Mount of Olives today. I've walked it many times. You're at the base of the Gihon Spring, and then you walk back up to the temple. So
I think Allison said when I went to do the recording on the quest for the historical Jesus that we did our course, and many people who watch MythVision, they think that the aim of the course is like we're looking for Jesus. They don't get it. No, it is literally an entire course about the history of scholarship from the Protestant Reformation forward and what happened from David Friedrich Strauss to some of the amazing scholars. And he mentions his he gets agitated by harmonizers and said for centuries now they have been defeated. So like it's almost like when Christian apologists will make these arguments about the Exodus, or they make these particular arguments that want to give, like, as it says, every single thing exactly verbatim is what happened kind of thing, instead of having nuance, flexibility, these kind of things, and saying, look, you're dealing with narrative, maybe mixed with memory of something,
and here's a preliminary that any believing Christian can maybe follow. This would be my advice to my students in my classes. Like when I teach the Jesus course, I just know, because of the demographics, I've taught for 30 years in Charlotte, that about 70% are believing, sincere, devout Christians wanting to learn more about Jesus. What I say to them is, let's take a step back from that, because that's not what we're doing. I'm in a state university. It's not a theology course. We're not in a seminary. I'll tell you something that could benefit you more. Hold the beliefs however you want, but let's ask not the question, did it happen, but what is the author of the text intending you to understand? Okay? If you change the question, then the next question could be, if you want to go there, oh, now I see what Mark's doing. Now I see what Matthew's doing. Mm-hmm. He makes it pretty clear, mm-hmm. Zechariah 9. Let's see what Luke does. Now, most people, I didn't know. You got to have your text open. I got my Throckmorton here. Luke does not put Zechariah in. He basically, like we saw before, sticks with Mark because it doesn't make a lot of sense to him. And also, I think he does know Matthew. I personally think he's aware of Matthew. He seems to say, well, that is kind of cool. Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. So it actually says, blessed is the king rather than blessed is the kingdom. So he might be influenced. Well, I want students to recognize all of that. And if your question is, I don't want to be insulting, but so elementary, remember, it's elementary, dear Watson. If your question is so elementary that all you want to know, I want to know what happened that day. I want a videotape of what happened. Well, first of all, you're not going to have it. And secondly, you're going to lose all the texts that we do have. Why not treasure what we do have first? And if you want to then ask, was it one animal or two or whatever? I see that as a side question, a subsidiary question. If I was talking to any apologist, I would say, reading Matthew's story, what's the point of the story told that way? Reading Mark's story, what's the point? Reading Luke's story. And then you could try to put them all together. We later had people trying to harmonize the Gospels, trying to put them in columns, trying to make it one voice. But why not respect the fact that we have several voices and don't interrupt? Like if I'm talking Mark, don't interrupt me. I'm talking Mark.
Yep.
And I won't interrupt you because it's not about what happened. You say, well, you think it didn't happen. Doesn't matter if I think it didn't happen. Let's take walking on the water. Does Mark have walking on the water? Yes. I think it's chapter 6. Okay. Did that happen, Dr. Tabor? Here's what I would say. We could discuss that if you wanted, but that's a metaphysical question. It involves Hellenistic divine men and all kinds of other things. Why don't we discuss where it is in Mark? Well, how does he tell it? How does he introduce it? And what's the result? And actually, it turns out that those miracles are negative in Mark. You know how to get fooled about Jesus in Mark? Get excited about the miracles.
Yeah.
That's what the disciples did. And guess what?
Yeah.
They never understood. And if you're the reader and you don't get that, you're falling into the trap that the disciples fell. Whoa, he walked on the water. He calmed the storm. Oh, he's Christ. And
He gets
that's
angry.
exactly what he didn't want you to say. He
This is
said,
what-
remember making the loaves? They have 2 loaves. And he goes, don't you remember I can make 5,000 loaves right now and sink the boat with loaves? But
Right.
is that the point? What about the leaven of the Pharisees that I told you don't want to eat in your bread? And they're like, we don't even have bread. What do you mean? You see, that's most people. I just want to know if he walked on water, Brother Tabor. Well, where is it in Mark? If you don't know where it is in Mark, you haven't studied Mark. You got to know the chapter. So that's a good. I only have 12.
We should probably go with some super chat.
Yeah. And look, James, just so everybody knows, when James bounces out, if you and me, Kipp, want to polish
I
up,
can continue for.
And do
a
you
little
have
bit.
super chats we need to address that apply to this, or are you just going to do them later, or what?
I'm going to ask him now, and then what we'll do is me and Kipp can freestyle a little longer once you're gone, James, just to touch on a few interesting things and emphasize stuff. Because initially, just so everybody knows, so you don't walk away from the stream feeling a little bit criticized, this was initially going to just be James. And then it was like, let's bring Kipp in to hang out with James and talk about these things. So
I like hanging out.
Yeah. But this was initially going to be just having Dr.
The thing is, all of us that work in the field, we really agree with these basic methods. And where we may disagree is what final conclusions we draw from them. Like, but let's say we're going to do Mark's empty tomb. I think Kipp and I and Allison and Bart, everybody would agree on the basics of what Mark probably is trying to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you want to say, was that historical? Was it not? That's sort of like a second level of inquiry. And I tend to try to keep students, put your nose in the text first. And then, you'll have a lot of time to ask those bigger questions as well.
Awesome. Salama 510, thank you for the super chat. Thanks all. Could you talk about the Greek Matthew versus the Hebrew Matthew sayings? Greek Matthew, is it possible later interpolations after the revolts?
Okay, well, there are 3 Hebrew Matthews. Mostly people are referring to what's called Evan Bohan. It was written by a rabbi, or preserved by a rabbi from, I think, the 1500s, 1400s, that George Howard published, but there are a couple of others as well, Dutillid and so forth. I've studied Howard's text quite a bit, and he argued that version did not come from the Greek. He got in a lot of hot water, but in his second edition, he addresses his critics. And I think he might have a point that it's some version that is circulated in Hebrew, passed along by rabbis along the way. And it's not, we extract Matthew. It's not like there's a copy of Matthew that rabbis walked around with, this is our Matthew. But he's aware of a copy and he puts it into this treatise that means the smooth stone, the honing stone, Evan Bohan. And he wants to then address it from a polemical point of view. They were having debates at this time in Spain about whether a rabbi and a Christian, remember Pablo Christianus and Rabbi Nachman had a big debate that's recorded for us, not on tape recorder, but stenography. It's pretty interesting to read, called The Disputation. You can get it in print. It's very interesting. So I think Hebrew Matthew, you got to always read it with that in mind. But Howard did point out that it does. For example, it likes the Trinitarian formula for baptism at the end, doesn't have it. It agrees many times with Luke's Q, not Matthew's Q, things like that. So it does seem to be a different text. I wouldn't say the Greek is better than Hebrew Matthew or Hebrew Matthew. A lot of people, they get all into, oh, it's Hebrew Matthew, then this must be the original, because there's some legend. What is it in Papias? Is that in
Yeah.
Papias where he wrote in Hebrew?
Yeah.
The Logia, but that's the Logia. I don't think it's the Gospel of Matthew from what I can figure out. But anyway, I think it's worth reading. If you go to my website, jamestabor.com, and write in Hebrew Matthew as a search term, you'll get some good analysis of it that I've offered. Also have a video of it that I gave at a bar conference. But usually when people get all excited about Hebrew Matthew, they're thinking it's going to replace the Greek. And I don't really think it can do that. So it's like Kipp mentioned earlier in terms of other versions of the Septuagint. We have papyri, Greek papyri found in Egypt, that don't agree exactly with our sayings in the canonical Gospels, but they are sayings of Jesus. Some of them are similar. We got the Gospel of Thomas. To me, I want it all. I want every scrap of evidence on every text. Put them side by side and discuss them. But I don't think there's any one you can say, this is the one. And again, that's scholarship. You've got to compare textual variants as well. Same thing.
Thank you. Thank you. From Kipp Davis's YouTube channel, Jason Rowland says the Sabbath made for man passage is prototypical example of the argument from Aramaic. I'd be interested in more discussion of that argument.
I'll leave that to Kipp.
Yeah. Okay. So that is which one is that? That's Matthew.
Picking grain on the Sabbath. Mark.
Yeah, that's it, right?
Mark 2, Matthew 12. Yeah.
Thank you. There we go. So this is something that I know Maurice Casey has written on this. Bart Ehrman has picked this up in some of his work. The idea behind this is that at a minimum, there seems to be maybe an Aramaic core of traditions or ideas or sayings floating around, and we can maybe tease out some of those on the basis of how a number of these texts reads. And this is one of those examples where in Mark, it says, I'm just looking here, it says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. Well, if this was an Aramaic saying, the word for man in Aramaic is just, it's just bar enosh. It's just son of man, right?
It means human
So
being. Yeah,
it's human being. So and it's exactly as James suggested. Mark's understanding of this story is that that Sabbath was made for human beings, and that's the point. The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. He's just saying that
human beings, yeah,
the human being
exactly
is the Lord of the Sabbath. But that's something that only comes out if this is a saying that originated within an Aramaic context,
right.
And I personally think it's a pretty good argument.
I do too. In Daniel 7, 13 and 14, very important as well for that same reason, because every Christian tends to jump to some kind of Christological interpretation. This is Jesus coming before the Father and receiving power and glory and so forth. And it is bar enosh. I saw a video just came up on my screen and I was finding out what Derek's doing lately. And it was something about, how all the critics are saying that's not Jesus and it's really Jesus. So apparently the apologists are arguing that it's Jesus. Well, it's not Jesus in Daniel, not because I don't believe in Jesus. is just not Jesus, because it's later interpreted as the saints of the Most High, meaning human beings. And the idea is that a group of human beings will receive heavenly exaltation or power. Let's just call it heavenly power. To them is given authority and power to rule all the nations. It's a common kind of messianic theme, but it's not about a Messiah, Davidic figure. It's about the people of God. And that would be very parallel to this. So who's Lord of the Sabbath? You're Lord of the Sabbath. Are you a human being? Are you made in the image of God? Genesis 1. So that's what he's saying. It's actually a funny exegesis of Genesis 2, verse 1 and 2, right? He rested on the Sabbath and blessed it and said, so it was made for humans.
Yeah.
Who did he bless it for? He blessed it for humans. Presumably God wasn't that tired. But he blessed it for humans and made it holy, made it special for humans. So that's all he's saying. That's a good point, Jason, that you brought that out. Thank you.
Jason's bright.
Salama's back. Matthew seems to tame Mark's Jesus and the Q Jesus, in a way taming Paul, Mark, and maybe Q, who reflects earlier radicals. Greek Matthew, the tamer.
Yeah, depending on the use of tame. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Eric Wander, thank you for becoming a member of Kipp Davis's Heaven.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
I just started channel memberships, people. So
okay.
Exciting.
Yeah, so that
I now have like 2. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing that. Salama's back. I can see how Mark's secret gospel and the ending would create all this interest in creating other gospels. The way Game of Thrones fans want to rewrite the ending and create their own endings.
Yeah,
that is true.
Yeah,
that show pissed me off when it ended the way it did.
Oh my God! Yes,
it's tragic. It's literally like another tragedy. That's
literally. And one thing to point out about Mark's secret Mark, I'm talking the Morton Smith text from Clement of Alexandria. There are 2 levels of discussion. You can read the Atlantic article that's out in the current issue. I subscribe, but I think it's behind a paywall, but I think it's going to be released soon. Usually they put it in a paywall for a week, so you'll be able to read it. But the thing people forget about it is, first of all, it's, if you thought it was an authentic letter of Clement, and he's authentically, or a copy, I should say, and he's authentically quoting what the Carpocratians have in 2 places. And he's saying, oh, when you come to Jericho, there's actually this. And then when you come to the garden, there's this. That has nothing to do with whether Greek Mark should have those passages or not. And Morton Smith, I knew him well. He did not argue that. He did not argue that Greek Matthew, you need to go put that in. What he argued is that behind the scenes, so to speak, of canonical Mark, there are alternative traditions about these baptismal rites, if it is baptism, and he thought it was. And they had to do with the nakedness that Jonathan Smith developed in his wonderful article called Garments Without Shame, where he finds it even in the prayer of Joseph, which is a very important, and it talks about trampling your old clothes, going down into the water and coming up with new clothes. Clothed, Paul uses that analogy. So it actually is part of a possible Pauline leaning tradition of naked baptism that would be like naked mikvah. But the idea of trampling your old clothes, that's symbolic. It's part of the ritual. So you strip down naked, you trample your clothes, you go into the water, and you come back up. And you say, well, that sounds kind of erotic. Well, I mean, Smith might have taken it that way personally, but if you look at his big book, his Harvard book, Clement of Alexandria and a Secret Gospel of Mark, he really isn't getting into that as much as a mystery religion that would have this ritual initiation of some type. And I think Paul has that. I think you find it in Romans. When you go down into the water, you're buried with Christ. And I think Mark has nothing about baptism except John's baptism. That's it. So secret Mark, so-called, doesn't mean it belongs in canonical Mark, but it's a later tradition that does develop. So
Thank you. Thank you.
mhm.
Dr. Romana says in Mark, when Jesus is asked if he is the Messiah and responds with ego e me, why do you think Matthew, Luke made the response even more ambiguous? The definitive response belies the secrecy motif.
Because in Mark, the secret is out. The secret is actually out when he rides the donkey down the hill. Because you now are proclaiming that the kingdom has arrived. And then he goes up and he pantomimes cleaning the temple of traitors, Zechariah 14, last verse. In that day, there'll be no traitors in the house of the Lord. And stop sacrifice, which is Jeremiah 7. So what Mark's doing is saying, hey, he fulfilled 3 texts. Like Solomon, he went to the Gihon on a donkey and was proclaimed king. Then, like Zechariah's prophecy, there'll be no traitor in the house of the Lord in that day. And like Jeremiah, he condemned the rapacious sacrifice where they turned it into a house of slaughter and commerce. And so these are all prophetic acts. And once that happens, the word is out. There's no secret anymore. And so for Mark, you just say, yes, I am. So why did Matthew and Luke make it more like you say it, or I would have to look. What did Luke say? Did he say you say it also? Let me look. But my point is, I think Mark has a singular purpose. There are 2 true confessions of Jesus. Peter's is not a true confession because he doesn't understand the suffering, right? That's inspired by Satan. Sorry about that. We did a couple programs on that. So where are the 2 confessions of who Jesus is? One is from Jesus himself. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? Yes, I am. The other is the centurion. And unlike Bart Ehrman and many interpreters, I don't think it's sarcasm. I think it's actually the great confession. You confess the God-forsaken, dead Messiah on the cross. Truly, this is the Son of God. And if you want to follow him, you'll too be a dead messianist on the cross. As you take up your cross and follow. That's Mark's message.
Interesting.
So he
It's
wants
a hard one to swallow.
Yeah. So it's not
Right.
sarcasm at all. It's actually the most profound statement in the Gospels. It has nothing to do with the culture, like, oh, but a Roman wouldn't have done that and all. That's not it. Look where he's doing it. He's about to be beaten to death as he says, I am. So I am what? I am the beaten, dead, beaten to a pulp Messiah. And he was what? The dead, God-forsaken Messiah. You still want to follow? Mark's basic. You still want to follow? Have at it. But if you turn that into triumph, glory, hallelujah, I think that's what Mark's worried about.
Yeah.
See, in the 2nd century, people are jumping on the bandwagon and they're saying, we got this new thing, man. Hook yourself to Jesus' star and he'll take you to heaven. He's the glory, hallelujah guy. And Mark's saying, whoa, maybe so, but you got to suffer first. And he's getting that from Paul. That is so Pauline, right? When Paul, the greatest chapter of Paul on glory is Romans 8. And what does he say after going through glorified bodies in the cosmos? Provided we suffer with him that we may be glorified with him. And when you say suffer with him, it means like him. So as Bob Dylan said, it ain't me, babe. Very few people are willing, and I'm not saying none are. Dietrich Bonhoeffer did, and I would admire him for that. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who stood in the pulpit, held up Mein Kampf, Hitler's biography. He was supposed to put it on the pulpit. He threw it on the ground and stepped on it and said, this will never be on the pulpit of this church.
I believe
And
he died in a
he was arrested promptly by the Gestapo and thrown in prison. And he wrote a book in prison called The Cost of Discipleship. And it
I believe
opened
he died in a concentration camp, didn't he? Or in
Yeah.
prison?
in prison. Yeah. And the opening line of Cost of Discipleship, which many Christians have read, very simple. When Christ calls a man, a person, he said man, but he meant a person, he calls him to die. And he didn't mean like, yeah, you know, I'm going to give up chewing gum for Lent.
That was my reading of Ignatius. I took a friend of mine who's not
Yeah,
aware of Christian theology, and I was explaining many Christians who listen to me describe it. If that's the version of Christianity, no wonder you left Christianity and were harmed by the ideas. Yeah, Ignatius writes to his Roman letter saying, I want to die. I'm asking you, if you love me, don't interfere and make sure that my death happens so that, and he repeats this phrase often, that I may attain to God.
Yes.
That he has an apotheosis.
Yeah. Paul started this. This is coming from Paul. Isaiah 53 is where a lot of it comes from, but that, when you read it with all of the suffering servant hymns, it's actually a collective call for a faithful remnant to bear up under abuse and suffering from the nations.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And not just the nations, even from the nation of the unfaithful ones. And it's a theme of second Isaiah. And it's very discreet. It's not carried on into third Isaiah, which is glory, hallelujah stuff. And it's very tough to read, but it's not the Lone Ranger doing it. Now, today, here will be my final criticism of people who use this stuff today. You can't sit in a comfortable pew with your Mercedes and your BMW out front on Easter morning and follow Mark and then go to lunch. You can't do that. Now, where it does come out is leave everything you have and give it to me, meaning the preacher and the church. If anybody wants to do that, that's fine. I'm being sarcastic, but you get the idea. You know, somebody says,
that's why
I think I'm going to sell my house and my car. Yeah, you got
make our own.
You got a building fund for the church, and I'm not making fun of this. I mean, I grew up in it, okay? So for me, this is real. I don't make fun of things that I don't understand. I make fun of it, I suppose we say make fun, making light of it, because it's so ludicrous. When Peter asks, we've left everything and followed you, what are we going to get? It absolutely, that's in Mark. And Jesus is just like, he just told the guy to give up everything he had and follow. And Peter go, oh, we did that. Are we going to get some stuff too? And then what happens? They all forsook him and fled. So that, you know.
A couple. Well, we got some more. I don't know how many.
Yeah, I'm gonna take off, you guys, because I've got a Lori's home, my wife, at 4:30, and I've got to help her with some things. So this is great, though. Thank you, Derek, for doing this, and Kipp.
Thank you.
And I hope it helps people.
You, James.
I want to help Bible readers of all sincere levels of approach, sincerity, and everything to just be careful readers of the text. That's it. And if you want to talk to me more about it, join my classes for the Zoom meetings or my Patreon, where I also meet with people once a month, and we talk about all this endlessly. Take care, everybody.
See you, James. Thank you for coming.
And do I need to leave my browser open?
No, we're not recording.
Yeah,
it's just live.
Yeah. It's live. Okay.
Yep.
See you guys. Take care. Thanks a lot for taking
Later.
it. Appreciate it.
Bye. Awesome. Okay. Well,
and then there were two, just like in Matthew, right?
Two donkeys, two asses.
Yeah. The two donkeys.
No.
Wow.
We've got some super chats we have to get through here, but did you?
Okay.
How do you want to do this? Super chat first, or do we want to talk about a few things first?
Let's do some super chats, so that we don't get too lost. Let's do
Okay.
some of those first, and then I had something else that I was actually hoping to to work through with James, but I'll talk about it.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So this is the next one, right? From Per
Yes.
Aspera ad
Thank you for the
Astra.
super chat. Could end of the age be a specific measure of time? Is an age an ambiguous idea, or could it have referred to their astrological calendar?
Um, I tend to think probably not probably not an astrological calendar. And one of the things that we see um within the ancient world, and within the texts that um I deal with in particular in the Bible, the Greek text and the Hebrew text, there's a sense, I think, where we project our ideas about eternality, or about um like this great cosmic distance, into the text that's not naturally there. um I tend to think this was this idea, of there being the end of the age, was not as ambiguous to the people who read the literature as it might seem to us. I, I don't think there's any question that pretty much all the Christian writers, all the New Testament writers, maybe, as you get to the later stuff, which is probably second century, like in the pastorals, but certainly like the early writers, like Paul, like the writer of the Gospel of Mark, and probably Matthew and Luke as well, was that um the end is coming and we need to be ready for when it comes. So in Hebrew, the word that is very often translated as eternal or eternity, it's an expression, ad olam. And usually, the vast majority of the time when this expression is used, it's just a lifetime, like the duration of a natural human life. So I think that that's built into this idea of the end of the age, that this is something that's temporal, and it's coming soon. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, there is a passage talking about the end of the ages, I think in Paul,
Mm,
if I'm not mistaken, plural. But there, I guess taking what Kip's saying, I once was totally persuaded of astrotheology all throughout the Bible, had this very esoteric kind of interpretation. And it worked during my deconversion phase to help me kind of find interesting different ways to view the biblical text and interpret it. But I'm very cautious on drawing. Well, we find synagogue zodiacs on the ground, and we know this is a Jewish movement, and they're using the term age to make all those connections, even though it's possible. I just don't draw those connections without any reference or clear that's what we are doing and we should interpret it that way. I tend to go with what you're saying here, and that is they're already 200 years, 150 years late to the party of what Daniel and the author there expected. So they're already like, man, the end has been rolling over for centuries now. They're kicking the can down the road. End of the age could be this generation. You could interpret within the context of Mark, he talks about a generation. Um, it could be Mosaic uh, age. How are we interpreting the age and what is meant here? I used to do the whole
mhm.
like, oh, this is the age of the lamb, because before that, or the goat, lamb, however you want to do that, before that, it was the bull. And I used to interpret the whole golden calf represented the bull Taurus symbol. And
Yeah,
before that, it was
yeah.
Gemini. And like I did all this like interesting stuff, but I'd be very cautious. Those are fun. They're more along the lines of like, oh, I can tell by how you act you're a Gemini, or like your zodiac sign means something to your destiny, or those kind of things typically end up getting introduced in those kind of interpretations by people like that. I'm looking for someone who can give me some concrete stuff though, and I'm interested in if that does draw that. Anyway, Jason Rollins over on your channel, Kipp. Mark teaches his Greek readers what Barabbas means before they get it. Mark 10:46, bar means son of. Mark 14:36, Abba means father. So it's already laid out that Barabbas can mean that, and that's what it means. But now you have a Jesus.
I have to go back and look to see if I would agree that Mark's readers are going to make that connection
right
on the basis of those texts. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah,
so
I went through the volume 3, and I was actually kind of blown away by how they.
Oh yeah, right.
Man, they go deep.
That's Matthew, right?
Yeah, Matthew.
The Matthew commentary. Yeah.
Allison and Davies, they go really deep into this. They say, so do you want me to read just briefly here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Barabbas, a political insurrectionist of Mark's rebel, is or in quotations, Mark's rebel, is known only from the New Testament, and sources dependent upon it. The name itself is Aramaic, Bar Abba, and probably means son of Abba. Abba equals father. Was a popular name in the Talmudic period, but it is attested in the pre-Christian period. Pre-Christian period, as is Barabbas. One must wonder, given the first name, Jesus, as well as the likely etymology of Barabbas, and Matthew's interest in the meaning of names. So Matthew seems to have an interest in names. Whether we do not here have profound irony, the two prisoners named Jesus are both son of the Father. According to Mark 15:7, Barabbas was among several rebels who had committed murder in the insurrection. And 15:27 equals Matthew 27:38 has Jesus crucified with two revolutionaries. So as a matter of history, it is possible that Pilate had already made ready crosses before he passed judgment upon Jesus, and that after the amnesty, Jesus was nailed to the cross originally intended for Barabbas. It's an interesting speculation that, like,
sure is.
But yeah. I'm curious about the insurrection happening in the 30s. I see that right. At 70 AD. It sounds like they misplace the insurrection here. But I don't know what's going on in the 30s where there's an insurrection. Anyway, he goes on and on. But I thought that was interesting that only Matthew calls him Jesus, Barabbas.
Barabbas.
Sure we could get so much out of that. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Jason.
Thanks, Jason. Pat Lowinger. Do I know this guy?
I've seen him around. He's trouble.
Yeah.
You might just want to even skip it. I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna.
No.
Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger regarding Mark 4 and the use of mysterion versus the use of mysteria in Matthew 13. One relating to unknown things versus secret and sacred rites.
So I think what Pat's getting at is that in Mark 4, this is the parables are the keys to the secret, right? They're through understanding them you become enlightened about the secret message. In Mark 4, he's using the singular, so this is the mystery, whereas in Matthew's 13, in his version of this story, he's using the plural, mysteria. So these are the secrets of unrelating to unknown things versus sacred or sacred rites. I have no idea about any of that stuff, and I'm sure Pat certainly knows this stuff a lot better than I do. So I don't know why he's asking me.
Well, he's
but I think I like this I like this fixation or this interest in the difference between the singular and the plural there, and that's undoubtedly significant. I have no idea why though.
I just being the mystery we talked about Mark's identity, or Matthew, Mark's Jesus hiding his identity. And like, of course, you, the reader, get it, but you, the reader, also get this Odysseus journeying back into Ithaca, and the god hides who he is, right? So Athena disguises Odysseus, the god or gods at play are hiding the identity of the person. That's why when James came on, he talked about the baptism. Only in Mark, God says, we've read Matthew so much and just go, and God spoke and the heavens opened and he says, this is my son, in him I'm well pleased. But in Mark, God speaks to Jesus and says, you are my son, in you I'm well pleased. Nobody heard it but Jesus. And
Right.
so I tend to look at genre and see secret identity looks so much like Odysseus. There seems to be, in my opinion, that is an overlooked emphasis, like how literary Mark really is trying to be
Sure. Yeah.
in hiding Jesus, just like Odysseus's identity as the king who's, there's so much. So I tend to like look at that and say there's something here. But there could be, even in the mystery cults themselves, some type of competition,
Yep.
Callan M says, love you folks. Your learning brings mental freedom.
Sweet. Thanks, Callan.
Thank you. Milwaukee Atheist. Kipp, have you read Odes of Solomon 19? Is this an inside joke?
Milwaukee Atheists is he's like my resident troll. If you guys want some really salacious stuff, you should go check out Lawrence's channel here, where he's reading through this like really pornographic book. So I honestly I'm yeah, sorry, Lawrence, I don't have Odes of Solomon 19 just off the top of my head here.
Thanks for the super chat. Guillermo Romero, forgive me if I butcher your name. Hi, Kipp, James, and Derek. I've been watching y'all recently and enjoying the videos on MythVision, Ichapod, and Apologia. Keep
Awesome.
up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Satan 616. Dr. Tabor, could you explain the symbolism of the story where Jesus heals the blind man in Bethsaida? I find that story unique among all the miracles. I'm sorry, Dr. Tabor already left. Symbolism there.
Yeah, and I can't answer that either. So I am even more sorry, Satan 616.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Miron Kaiser. I wish he was here to explain it, but time was limited. I will try to he'll probably watch this later if he comes to this point.
I actually know this person from a Discord server. So if you happen to get this question to Dr. Tabor and get an answer for him, I could just paste that into the server. There you go.
Thank you. Jason Stewart, where did Mark get the tradition of skeptic family?
Skeptic family, like the idea that I'm assuming this is the idea that Jesus was not accepted or was rejected by his own family members. Where did he get that tradition? I think that I mean we can't trace we can trace almost nothing back to an historical Jesus, right? Like, it's an idea, it's a model that's out there, and scholars have all sorts of different ways of filling this in. And I tend to think that I prefer a much more conservative approach to the gospel text by just looking at what these are doing as literature, right? How are they handling their theology of this charismatic person and constructing this into biographies about him? So I don't put much stock at all into pulling tons of history out of the gospel text. But I will say, I think there's maybe a reason that this idea was maybe there's some historical reality here that Jesus was in fact rejected by his family, and that's being carried forward in the tradition. Another way of looking at this too is that if you think, as I do, that there's this this ongoing tension between the Jerusalem church, the first Christian movement in Jerusalem, which was for all intents and purposes a Jewish sect,
Mhm.
and some of these other churches that have been planted around the empire by the Apostle Paul. Uh, and if we're connecting Mark to Paul, I mean, Mark is the one who basically titles his gospel the Evangelion, right? The good
Mhm.
news of Jesus. This is Paul's word, like this is his. And I mean, Mark is very Pauline in a lot of his theology. So if you look at it that way, then maybe this is a polemic that developed if Jesus's family is actually, or members of his family. We have this tradition that Jesus's own brother James was the leader of the Jerusalem church. Maybe that's where this tradition comes from. Maybe it's
Right.
this
Polygamy.
idea,
Yeah.
right? We tell this story about how Jesus basically cast his own family aside as
Mhm.
a way of polemicizing against the Jerusalem church. um we don't know, but
Yeah.
there's some interesting ideas with regards to how that develops.
I've actually had several conversations with like gospel experts, Pauline experts
Mm.
that specialize on Paul and get down into the weeds. And I've thrown this hypothesis out, including wrote it into my only article I have on academia, which is I call it
Oh,
the minimal doubts argument, kind of just reasons why we should all doubt everyone. I mean, I'm trying to encourage people to think critically, and I use the New Testament to show you a doubting tradition that even they doubted. And I'm not talking about just they, like the original guys who supposedly saw Jesus doubted. And then everybody goes, well, yeah, yeah, yeah. They doubted before they saw Jesus. No, Matthew has them on a mountain seeing the supposed apparition, resurrected Jesus, call it him in his flesh, however you want to interpret this. They're worshiping him and some doubted. They're worshiping the guy that was already
right.
dead and they're
Yeah.
doubting still.
Yeah.
How are we 2,000 years removed not doing the same? And you didn't even get to see the guy and they're doubting. But you're standing here going, no, no, no. I'm reading John. Blessed are you who don't see and believe. Just good old boy. You just accept
Yeah.
what you read and you face value. That I want to encourage doubt. But the other thing I mentioned is that ending of Mark. And I wondered, speculating, based on the polemic you described, this is speculation, but if Matthew or Mark's connected to Paul in any way, is this a jab at the Jerusalem church? Is this
Yeah.
me saying the women went and told no one? The, who got the real revelation? Maybe Paul. I mean, this is speculation, but if Paul is schismed from the rest of the Jerusalem church, then the reason the women were afraid and told no one, meaning the disciples didn't get the news, because Mark
That's
says
right.
that they
That's
did not tell them,
yeah,
then who
exactly.
got the true, who understood? Well,
Paul
we know
got it
Mark
from
and
Jesus.
Paul.
Just
Right.
straight from Jesus, right?
Total
So I
speculation,
just
but
I wanted to sorry, I just wanted to point out one of one of the commenters here, Nathaniel Krum said a polemic. Get it?
ooh,
Polemic. That's a fun word. Polemic.
thank you so
I
much
like
for
that.
that. I also don't rule out a literary. That's the problem, man. This is the problem. We don't know. Did Matthew make a mistake? Get it? Did he get the doublet mistake here with the Hebrew parallelism? Is it possibly this? Is it possibly that? It could be any of them, and
Oh
there's some
yeah,
we
right.
lean toward. So we get this high certainty when we investigate. And I could probably point to something in other literature that shows the skepticism of the family toward that person, and maybe the author's doing this literarily. Maybe there's no historical basis for it, and it's purely to get the reader to go, oh my gosh, even his family's rejecting him. He looks crazy.
Yeah,
The disciples can't. I mean, we don't know, we don't know.
exactly.
Jim Shannon, great stuff. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Last one, you're cool, so I'm just sending you money.
Oh, nice. Did he send it to you? Are you the cool one?
I'm gonna
I
say
think he
it was
sent
you. I'm gonna say it was you.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. This
Are you
came
just
around the
saying
time
that
were
because you don't want to hurt my feelings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh wow. That's okay. I'm a nerd, man. I'm comfortable. I'm cool with that. Right?
Don't cry. Don't cry.
I won't. But if you guys really want to make me feel better, you can send me your money. So
That's right. Make him feel better.
That's a good way to do it.
Super chat right now to make Dr. Kipp feel better, please. On his channel.
Don't do that. So I guess we got a few minutes, right? That was all of them. I'm pretty sure the super chats, but there was one other thing that I wanted to pull up. I was hoping to do this while James was here, but that guy, he just talks and talks and talks, right?
Of course. No, dude, there's so much he knows about this, though. It's like,
I know, right? No, it's awesome. It's fun to hear. So, like the one parallel there, which is it? I'm gonna ask you to pull it up. The
that he brought up.
Yeah, the ones
John
that
the Baptist, baptism of Jesus, picking brain on Sabbath, or grain on. I typed in the wrong word. Why
it's the
cursing Peter.
It's the who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? That one. That's
is that why do you call me good?
That's why I think that's why do you call me good? Maybe look at that one. Oh, I have them here too. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah.
So.
Chicken grain. Why parables? I like the parables one.
Oh, it's no, it's cursing. Peter's cursing.
Got it.
The confession. Yeah. So pull that one up.
Okay.
The confession is cool. So, and the reason why I wanted to draw some attention to this is because, like, oh, yay!
You did
Thank you, Claude Simeon. Really appreciate it. I feel better now.
Good.
Okay. So in Matthew's transformation of this story, can you zoom in on the first bit there? Yeah, where we can see them both together. So here's I'll just read it, right? In Mark 8:27. And we'll just go through these first couple of verses here. Jesus went with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do men say I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And then he asked them, "And who do you say I am?" And Peter answered, "You are the Christ." So one of the interesting things that Matthew does here, see if you can pick up on it, Derek. Look at this. He says, "Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do men say that the Son of Man is?'" So he's changing it right there, right? And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah,
right,
or one of the prophets."
Right.
And he said to them, "But who do you say I am?" Simon, son of Peter, said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So right away, when I look at this, and I'm cheating here because, guys, I did like I wrote like a whole dissertation about Jeremiah and what happens with the persona of Jeremiah in the Second Temple period. Like how did ideas about who Jeremiah was and what he did develop for Jews, and why? So right away I'm looking at this passage, and what's different here? when people respond, they've for Matthew, somehow he thinks some people thought he was Jeremiah. Well, why did they think that?
Yeah, why target that one name?
Right? Now and some of this is easy too, right? Like we know that there's this tradition already developed within Mark about Jesus being like a redivivus of John the Baptist and Elijah. And in particular, and James mentioned this, right? Oh, just you wait, Tomer. We're gonna open the dissertation up. Just you wait. Within James mentioned already that within Jewish tradition there was this idea, right, that in the last days Elijah was going to come back. So what on earth is Jeremiah doing here? And this was actually like a question that I asked and attempted to answer in my dissertation. I probably should have marked the page here. So I'm going to have to I think it's
How dare
back
you?
here.
How
I know.
dare.
Oh yeah, this is the right chapter. This is the prophetic persona 2. Sorry, there we go. The perceptions of Jeremiah in the Second Temple period. So, and I go through Jeremiah traditions from the Persian period to Antiochus IV, and then I have a section here on let's see, Jeremiah in the Hasmonean and the Herodian periods, and then even a section after that on, I'm getting there, almost there. So close. Wow, that's a long
Jeremiah's a
section.
big
Oh,
hill.
wow, we're still going. I mean, people had all these ideas about what on earth was who Jeremiah was and what was going to happen to him. I have one here now in the Herodian and the post-temple Judaism, and I've got a subsection on the New Testament, and I'll just read it. Imagery from the book of Jeremiah has been employed in the Christian apocalyptic revelation of St. John, in accordance with elsewhere in Jewish apocalyptic literature. We're not going to get into that. However, most prominent in the New Testament writings is the association of Jeremiah's call from birth as a popular legitimization tactic for Paul. He alludes to this in Galatians chapter 1. And then I go on to talk about this passage, which I think is kind of interesting. In an unusual instance, there appears to have been an expectation for an eschatological return of the prophet Jeremiah. Matthew 16, 13 to 14 says that he tells this story that some people thought he was Jeremiah. The pericope seems to indicate through the disciples' response and expectation for Jeremiah's reappearance as part of an eschatological event. Some scholars have understood this to be based on a version of the expectation that is also alluded to in 2 Maccabees chapter 2 for Jeremiah to return and reveal the hiding place of the ark and the temple objects. I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with this
Yeah.
tradition, Derek? So
it's almost a martyrological one too. That's combined with this prophetic tradition.
Yeah, exactly. So at the beginning of the book of 2 Maccabees, which I believe is 1st century BC, there's this story of Jeremiah basically hiding the Ark of the Covenant, and it's not just the Ark, but it's also the lampstand. And that this is going to be revealed in the end of the age, right? So, however, David Law has suggested that the Matthean evangelist's edition of Jeremiah is intended for an eschatological point through which he sought to illustrate that the church, under the guidance of Peter, would be the rightful heirs to the new covenant. from Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 to 34. Remember, Jeremiah talks about the new covenant.
Right.
The old covenant has passed away. He's going to make a new covenant with Israel instead of Israel. And this would also fit within Matthew's larger theological program about the rejection of you know, the Pharisaic Jews, the surviving Israel after the destruction of the temple, in favor of you know, this new Israel in the church, with the new Gentile church. So this employment of Jeremiah conforms to a widespread understanding in antiquity of the importance of the new covenant for the future of Israel. Furthermore, it conforms to a popular usage of the prophet that has already been observed. The eschatological expectation that is synonymous with the new covenant is a hopeful verification of Jeremiah's continuing prophetic function. That is, Jeremiah's prophecies live on through his reputation as a reliable prophet. So that hasn't been published, by the way. That's part of my dissertation that was never published. So, but the idea here is that and I don't know if that's my favorite explanation for it. This idea of the writer of Matthew throwing this in there as kind of a nod, right, to the new covenant. But it's one of these interesting questions, right? Obviously, for Matthew, this is important. Why is it important? These are just the same sort of questions that we need to be asking when we're approaching the text, because we love the text.
Absolutely. And what's interesting to me, going to the end of Matthew, thinking about the graves that open and the saints that come forward, these aren't the disciples.
Yeah.
They're all, I mean, these are the prophets. These are the, so is he writing a well-crafted narrative that has Jesus check off all these boxes that we are discovering are prevalent within Jewish communities, and he has to check those boxes off? Like, he's fulfilling this new covenant. We got to have Jeremiah in there. You know, like, I feel like he's doing this, and of course painting it as if this is in the life of Jesus. Whether or not anything remotely close to this is what actually happened with Jesus or not is irrelevant.
He doesn't care.
Yeah, he doesn't care. That's why I'm saying, like, did he care about the tombs opening up? And it's so obvious. Yeah.
It's what, like, it, and that's sort of like it's silly to me. And I'm going to mention this again just because it comes up all the time. Like, I was in somebody's stream last week, just chatting with people in the chat, as I have a tendency to do, and this is the constant response that I'm getting concerning this two donkey motif. Right?
Yeah.
It's obvious that Jesus couldn't have been riding two donkeys because that's absurd. Right. So there's just no way Matthew would have said that, because it's absurd. And this is just completely missing the point, and it's assuming way too much of the text, right? Matthew's got his own thing going on, and I just don't think he cares. And the story of the graves of the saints that are open is an excellent illustration of just how much Matthew does not give a fuck about being real, right?
That's exactly what Bart. So for those who don't know, I edit Bart's courses, his lectures. Really, the Queen does most of that, and occasionally she asks me to help. And I just was fortunate enough to hit the lecture where he's talking about the birth narrative, and he goes, "All right, we're going to have a head scratcher here. They follow a star." Okay, now that makes common sense if we think about it. Here, there's a star in the sky over here, but the text in the Greek says that the star hovered over the house, the place where Jesus is, right? So now we have to try and visualize this. We know what stars are. Obviously, they didn't know then, but we know what stars are. And then try to visualize this massive sun, which is not even remotely, especially with our knowledge, But what do they think? Like a twinkling little light is like just glowing above a house? Like the point is, he says it doesn't make sense. And if you try to
No.
visualize it, it's a story. And so he brings up this analogy. I said this yesterday on my live stream, but for those who don't tune in, his kid is watching a fictional movie. I don't know. Let's just say Lord of the Rings. And the kid goes, Dad, is this true? And he goes, yes. And then they go, no, 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 Dad, did it happen? And then Bart says, no. And he's like, just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it doesn't have truth to it. And notice we have to have true be what actually happened. And it's like,
Yeah.
dude, if apologists could let go of that, I don't know if I'd have much of a job in the anti-apologetic arena. You see what I mean?
Right? Yes.
The Exodus story.
See, this is
it happened as it's
you
really?
edited my course, and this is
Right.
lecture 4 in my course, right? Where
Yep.
I talk about the life of Pi, the movie
I
and the
love
book.
that.
I talk about this this amazing statue that I love, the Foot Soldiers of Birmingham in Birmingham, Alabama. As illustrative of just how much even now today we extract truth from things that are not historical, from mythology, from modern mythology. Like why can't we extend the same courtesy to ancient people? It's yeah, man.
I
Yeah.
love that. I have to give the example from Pi. I have to pop
Oh, yeah,
people's
sure.
bubble. I mean,
Yeah.
right now, disclaimer. What do they call that when you're giving things out that you haven't seen yet, or you?
Spoiler alert? Is
Yeah,
that it?
spoiler
Come on,
alert.
everybody's seen the movie.
I just want to make sure if you haven't seen The Life of Pi, you still need to watch it because this is still going to hit hard, hit home. At the end, he describes, for those who don't know, he was a young boy. He journeys from, like, I think it was India. He has this like
Yes.
really almost existential crisis as a kid about, is it Judaism, Islam, or
So
Christianity? And
Pi
he
is he's simultaneously
and
a
the
Muslim, a
Hinduism.
Christian, and a Hindu. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he ends up going on this trip and it gets disastrous. The ship wrecks with all the animals that they owned in their zoo. They're trapped on a boat, and it's all these animals and him, Pi. Long story short, he survives somehow. This is where the spoiler alert comes in. And he tells this story that is so fictional but amazing to this
Hmm.
reporter that is like a journalist that's going to like report on the story. And the guy's like, I don't believe this. And he's like, okay, well, neither did the Chinese or the Japanese ship owners who came to me needing to investigate further and wanting to know the story. And so I told them this one, and it's his mother gets attacked by the cook that was on the ship. They end up having to eat
Hmm.
in order to survive. They had to eat the bodies of the rotting corpses that were on the ship. I mean, it got real. It was bad and ugly. And the guy's face, like almost shocking, knowing the reality that this guy had to go through. And then Pi goes, so I've told you the story about the animal and then the cannibalism. Which one seems more true? And he's like, well, obviously this one where it's ugly and nasty. And he goes, but which one do you prefer? And he's like, the animal story. I prefer that story way better. And he goes, the same is true with God. And it was just like, it was like, okay, this is good. I love this movie. Anyone who watches it can get the whole, can get the gist of what he's trying to say. So,
Can I, on that point, can I read you something? Because
sure.
and it'll be short here because I'm turning the course into a book, right?
Hmm.
So I've written about this now. This is now from my chapter 4 of the book I'm writing, where I talk about the movie and how this helps us to understand uh the Hebrew Bible and the relationship between myth and history. So here's what I say in the chapter, and I'm speaking of mostly the novel. And I would encourage people to read the novel as well, because it is really brilliant. So in the novel, when the Japanese investigators tell Pi that they prefer the story of the tiger, he responds, "So it goes with God." At one point in their investigation, he says to them, "Don't bully me with your politeness. Love is hard to believe. Ask any lover. Life is hard to believe. Ask any scientist. God is hard to believe. Ask any believer. What is your problem with hard to believe?" In the end, the report filed by the investigators reads, "The story of the sole survivor, Mr. Pisin Molitor Patel, Indian citizen, is an astounding story of courage and endurance in the face of extraordinarily difficult and tragic circumstances. In the experience of this investigator, his story is unparalleled in the history of shipwrecks. Very few castaways can claim to have survived so long at sea as Mr. Patel, and none in the company of an adult Bengal tiger." Now, something that I want you to notice right away from the report here, as it's written by the author Jan Mattel, notice what he says here. Very few castaways can claim to have survived so long at sea as Mr. Patel, and none in the company of an adult Bengal tiger.
Right.
And that ends up being a true statement, right? Because
Obviously,
Patel
yeah,
also did not survive so long at sea in the company of an adult Bengal
exactly. He
tiger.
mixed
So,
in the fictional tiger
yeah,
aspect into
exactly.
the
So,
reportage. Yeah.
here's how I finish. I said that the topic of this chapter, this is the fourth chapter in my book. The final chapter in this background section is the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. At this point, you're undoubtedly puzzled. What on earth does Jan Martel's novel have to do with this book? What does it have to do with the Hebrew Bible? Before delving into the finer details of our study of Israelite religions, it is necessary to cover some of the points about the Hebrew Bible in view of the three critical assumptions of what we call historical criticism. And these are as follows. Ancient texts are best understood when they are set within their own culture and language and against a relevant religious, political, and economic backdrop. Second, when we read history, we assume that the same causes and effects which govern our world have also been active at all times and in all places. And third, when reading ancient accounts of history, our analyses should start from a skeptical disposition. I've just got one more paragraph here. We are fortunate to have access to a huge amount of archaeological and historical data from other contemporary cultures, which help us to understand better the religions of ancient Israel. While there are important material discoveries in Israel and Palestine that increase our knowledge of this topic, the Hebrew Bible remains the best resource. But this is problematic, since, as we have already come to see, many of the Hebrew Bible texts are late embellishments, which do not clearly and accurately describe the real world that we discover through archaeology. The comparative data are extremely useful for contextualizing much of what is in the Bible, but much like Pi Patel's story of his actual ordeal at sea, the biblical text is an idealized lens through which we see mostly distortions. Our temptation at the outset is to make this hard distinction between myth and truth. The Bible can't be true for its fantasy, talking animals, divine encounters, unexplicable natural phenomenon, errors of fact and history. We are like the Japanese insurance investigators in Life of Pi, but even they managed to grasp the intrinsic value in Pi's tale of Richard Parker. Take another look at the final sentence of the report. Very few castaways can claim to have survived so long at sea as Mr. Patel, and none in the company of an adult Bengal tiger. None means none. There is no acceptance of his invented story as anything more than it is, a coping mechanism to help him grapple with the tragic reality. No one has survived so long at sea in the company of adult Bengal tiger, no one including Mr. Pi Patel. But for Pi, the tiger is real because it helps him to make sense of what he's endured, to come to grips with his own regrettable part in the survival at all cost predicament. It's just a better story. For Pi, for the writers of the Hebrew Bible, and the name of the chapter, this chapter in my book is called, the title of the chapter is "The Map is the Place." For Pi, for the writers of the Hebrew Bible, the map is the place, right?
Mhm.
It's the veneer that we put on top of these things to help us make sense of real life.
Yeah.
I'm done now.
No, I love that. I love that. And I think that's what I hope shines through with what you and me do, with the
Yeah.
work we do, because there's so much antagonism. Often it can get lost in translation because we're always fighting against the this had to happen, absolute confidence, historical. The Bible says what it says, and it happened the way it happened, the way it says it happened. And it's like, actually, I understand that they don't practice that often. They'll find the meaning of being freed from Egypt, bondage, or whatever. They know how to create a sermon that gives the value and meaning of a lesson from the myth. And yes, it's myth. But I think when we finally get over this and stop pretending that it's not mythology, that it's not legend, that it's not folk tales, that it's not something that has truth in the narrative with maybe verisimilitude, as you pointed out, we can get, I think we're getting better. We're getting closer because a lot of this literalist approach has caused quite damage in modern times on dogmatism, and this is the one. And in inconsistencies, right? Don't we want to be accurate in the way we handle this stuff? So we get so caught up in showing why something didn't happen historically with archaeological stuff. Joshua's conquest, for example, we can do
I
plenty
mean,
of
my
good
God,
work.
look at the pretzels that William Lane Craig has to tie
For
himself into
Canaanite
because of this,
genocide.
right? For
Yeah.
to apologize for, Canaanite slaughter. Like,
Yeah.
what the hell are you doing?
I don't even think he
And you don't
apologized.
have to. Well, I
You know what I mean?
apologize in the sense of providing an apologetic. I should have
Right.
said that.
Right.
Apologeticizing.
Yeah, I get
You
what you
don't
mean.
have to do that if you are not committed to accepting that this is history and that this is good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
This
And
is easy, people. This is
I would
easy.
like to break that down, by the way, and go into that in depth with you and Josh at some point, because
Yeah, let's
we
do it.
want to get to we want to be the Japanese reporters who are trying to be as meticulous about what actually happened. Well, let's do that. Let's do that. And but also, we
Let's do
don't
it.
want to take away the toy, that the fun, the story that may give people meaning and purpose and help them traverse this world, this life that can be difficult at times. And it's a very old, I mean, this is ancient, right? So there's part of this, in a sense, that's our history. It's part of our tradition. It's built into what we value. A couple supers and then we can go eat lunch. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds good. I need to eat something.
Core Hill,
Hey.
this is for the Lambert of God. Thank you so much. Core Hill says, and this is for the.
Ah. Thank you, Corhill.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the love. Here we are.
Me too.
Michael Apple, for hearing Dr. Kill say Matthew doesn't give a fuck. Wisdom of the ages. Well, we can't. Let's be honest. Let's be
Here,
fair.
people.
So here's the thing. You brought this out when we had our little private discussion, because for those who don't know, we have a secret society in our little messenger groups that we do.
It's called the Illuminati.
Yes, we get paid by them.
Illuminati.
Yep. Do you get yours direct deposit or is it in a paper check?
No, because I live out in like a secret base in the middle of nowhere. I have to I have to get it. I have to get it mailed.
Okay.
That didn't make any sense at all, did it? But
Yeah, it didn't make any sense, but guess what? It doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't matter. This is the point. So you brought up that, did he make a mistake or was it intentional? And there's no way to know that
we don't
with
know.
certainty because we can't read the mind. But when you say Matthew doesn't give a fuck, you're not saying that he doesn't. You're saying in the sense that Matthew's not trying to nail down a historical story that is supposed to say this is exactly what happened and this is the exact version of it that is exact history. He's writing fanciful material and going so far to add things to a text we know he's read and is using as inspiration for his own gospel. That is what you're trying to say. But to say that he doesn't give a fuck, that could be interpreted in many ways by people. So
maybe a better way to say this is Matthew doesn't give your fuck. Is that even to say that? And I'm speaking to speaking directly to Christian apologists here. Matthew's program is not your 21st century evangelical Christian harmonization program.
Right, I agree, 100%. And his program is pretty cool with me. It's interesting storytelling. And we can give other examples. Birth narratives, go to Suetonius, blah, 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 blah.
Sorry.
I can go on.
The chat is gold, right? I'm sorry.
Really?
No, I'm looking at Callan N says biblical scholars equal James Bond villains in my old worldview. Kipp likely lives in a dormant volcano shaped like a skull.
That's true.
Yep.
I've seen his house.
It is.
I've seen it. I know exactly what it looks like. Yeah, and there's a star that rests every night right above that skull home that he lives in.
It's just right above us here.
Right above.
It's like a white giant, I think, is the type of star. So it's probably going to explode soon.
Probably.
Yeah.
It makes it. Salama says, great read, Kipp. The truth is either too horrible or too boring. So we write myths.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. No, that's awesome. Thank you very much, Salama 510. You get it.
In fact,
again,
it's interesting. We talked about this, you and me, about not only Josh McDowell's testimony, which he really likes to spice up more and more over time, but our own becoming Christian testimonies, how you have to make it even more than what it would have been if you had a camera that we could play back that was hidden to what actually took place in our lives and then played it. You'd be like, where's the magic in this? And then with us describing our story, piecing it together to explain it, we tell it in a way, that is oftentimes fiction. And we're the ones trying to tell you about our own life. It gets fictionalized in the telling of the narrative.
And this is the human brain too, right? Like we're the most we're the greatest pattern building machines ever known. And this, as far as we know, yes. But this is the way the human brain works. This is the way memory works. We reconstruct our reality. We reconstruct our past in ways that make sense to us and also help us to feel better or help us to, this is why, for some people, when terribly traumatic things happen, they just block it out, right? So good.
Yeah, there's so much truth to this super chat, it's not even funny. I love it, I really do. Doc Ploromanot again for the Monte Cristo Kipp.
So this was actually from your last live stream, I believe. Was it yours? Yeah, it was the last stream that you did. I'll be honest, Eric, I got bored, so I started talking about sandwiches in the chat.
Got it.
And I Doc Ploromanot picked up on the fact that I like Monte Cristos. I'm not gonna lie. I know they're bad. They're really bad for me, but I like them. I haven't had one in a while.
Well, thank you for that super chat, Alex. Is it? I don't want to butcher your last
I would
name.
say Zayla.
Zayla. Okay. Historical.
Why not?
With the
lol.
Oh, Dr. Cheryl.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's
holy
a huge
cow.
one. Thank you so much. This is to help you finish your book, Kipp. So far, it sounds
Wow.
excellent.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm gonna have to send you with the amount of support that Dr. Cheryl Lyle has thrown my way, in particular for the book. I think at this point I'm probably gonna have to just send you a copy when it's done. But thank you so much. I really am humbled and honored by that.
Thanks for the support and always being
Yeah.
in the chat. Always optimistic,
Yeah,
man.
right. Always
Seriously.
there.
We know who the true, friends
Well,
and
we know
people.
it's not working, right? We know that much.
One of the 99, it's only truth if you believe it.
That's
I guess
that's
you
a
could
thing
say.
too. Yeah, you
Yeah,
could.
because it's a bit subjective too, right? Because one person, if we're interpreting truth, defining it in a vague way and not defining it as truth means exactly what happened, right? Because there's so many interesting things. I can watch the beginning of Apocalypto, where the one-armed Indian guy at the fire is telling the story about the animals, and they look into the man. The man has a black hole, and how do we fill that want, that need of?
Yeah, right.
There's some depth to that made-up story where that old man, you can see it in his eyes, has been through it. He knows what fear is, right? And like, that's complete storytelling, but there's truth to it. That's the category I think me and Kipp are trying to gear toward when we're explaining some of this stuff. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I
Yep.
believe that for sure. Kipp,
It's
I
good.
know you have
I think
like
that's it, eh?
any bow, any ribbon to put on the end of this. So like, we're looking forward to the Allison discussion, right?
Oh, I'm stoked about that. So you wanna set that up, or do you want me to?
You're gonna need to
So I'm
stream it on yours as well, obviously.
we'll do it. So it's April 11th, right? It's a Thursday. Check my calendar.
Yeah, I need to look.
At noon. Derek has managed to get Dale C. Allison on his channel to talk about what's going on in Matthew chapter, it's 21, I think, the story of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem.
Mhm.
He's invited me to come along, and I am stoked about that because I, unlike Derek, I've never had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Dale C. Allison. So,
Right.
some of us biblical scholars, we're just as big fanboys as and girls as the
Right.
rest of you. So I'm super excited. But yeah, that's happening at noon on the 11th, I think. So
Absolutely. And you have Diablo
look for
critics. Are
that.
you doing that? Like, is that going to
The
continue?
Every month there's going to be a new Diablo Critics episode at 11 o'clock Pacific time on the second Sunday of the month. So I think that's for April. I think it's actually the 14th of
So
April will be the next episode. I'm still recovering from the last episode, so we haven't made any plans about that, except to say that moving forward, we have to do a 2 hour. We have to do a 2 hour limit. Sorry, it gets crazy.
yeah,
So, but we're gonna be back, and we're gonna be back on all the channels. I don't know if you knew this, Derek, but when we did the last streamer, we're doing these this way,
right.
moving forward. We were broadcasting on 6 channels. Mine, Dr. Dan McClellan's, Jennifer Bird's, Matthew Monger's channel, on Digital Hammurabi, on Deep Drinks podcast, we were broadcasting live, as well as on a couple of Facebook channels, and I think maybe even TikTok. I don't remember, but there was just a pile of channels that
I did musical
we were
streaming
on.
that day. I popped into
Oh,
one.
did you? Were you popping in all over
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
place?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Nice,
yeah. I
nice.
couldn't stay
So
on too long,
it's
but
Yeah, no, it's so we're doing that this way moving forward, and it's going to be huge.
yeah.
I so that's what's on my immediate horizon. I have a couple of other things coming up. I think I'm Josh and I Dr. Josh and I are going to be doing a recording with my friend, What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. And we're talking about ancient mythology and the Hebrew Bible. So we did some, he and I also did some recordings with Rationality Rules several months back now. I expect that's coming out at some point soon. And I just recently also did a recording with Apostate of Mind. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he's gonna have me on his channel talking all about new developments on the Mount Ebal so-called curse tablet. I think it was probably 6 or 8 weeks ago now. The archaeologist for the Associates of Biblical Research, Scott Stripling, who announced the finding of this tiny little lead tablet that he thinks has Proto-Hebrew written on it, but actually has nothing written on it. So he was very heavily criticized in the excellent journal. They dedicated 3 articles to the object, the Israel Exploration Journal. This was published in November. And Stripling went on Sean McDowell's channel a couple months back to basically try and set the record straight. Well, my friend Apostate of Mine called me up and said, "Hey, would you join me and help to just, correct all the nonsense?" So that's coming. And I also have channel memberships now.
That is, we saw miracles today. We saw it happen.
We did.
So you can join his channel.
I think I have two members so far. So if you want to join the ranks, I gave it a super cheesy name. I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Go join and you'll find out.
That's right. So
yeah.
So
well, I'm
cool.
excited about what you've got coming up. There's so much you're working on. I love that you're active doing this full time. Like you're doing it, I'd say mostly full time. Like you're really putting into this. And I say it all the time, every time I stream. If you like someone, you like the scholarship, you like the ideas, and keep in mind, not only can you support that keeps happening, but oftentimes when you put your income in somewhere, you can gear or give ideas to the creator that help inspire them to help, create that kind of content that you're geared toward or what you're interested in seeing. So help support the scholars that you like. You can do that by books, subscribing, super chatting, joining memberships, joining Patreons. List can go on and on, of course. We have all sorts of stuff coming up. I would bore you to death with the list of things There's sure that I have going on.
Always something going on MythVision.
Yeah. I would probably need 30 minutes to go, okay, so we're doing this and we're going to do that. And we got this and we're going to do that. I'll tell you this, I am going for vacation for spring break. I'm going to see Dr. Richard C. Miller in California. We're family connecting and going and checking out different places. But
are you going to Disneyland?
We may. I think so.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, but the Queen has all that figured out. Me and Rick are going to put the camera on and we're going to go through.
You guys should film at Disneyland.
I know, right? Well, we'll see. That's a lot of work carrying the camera around.
I know.
We're doing a course there with him, but also I'm going to do a response video, I think, to David Wood when he shows the Quran against the apologist, the Muslim apologist who somehow concedes that the Quran may have fables in it. And David's like, see, he admits it. Like, actually,
listen,
did you know your New Testament has fables too?
Yeah.
So,
Listen, I'm sorry. I just have to say something because that video that you did about David Wood was great. That was fantastic. People need to check that out. But seriously, David Wood is like he's an anti-Islamic polemicist. Like I wouldn't even say he's a counter apologist. He's just mean and gross about it. and it's really kind of disgusting.
Mhm.
And I certainly appreciate that you are starting to call him to the carpet for that,
Yeah,
because
I don't even call him out for being critical and showing something he thinks is terrible or
yeah,
not true. Like, go for it.
yeah,
These religions need to be critiqued, but when it's so obvious, it's like saying, imagine if I titled my video, and I'm a Christian, I title my video about Muhammad, the biggest failed prophet in the world, or something. And then the whole thing is just picking on Muhammad for being a failed prophet. And it's like, do you know anything about New Testament scholarship, about the near expectation and apocalyptic
right.
claims of the prophet Jesus and how they didn't happen? Do you know anything about that? Well, no, he doesn't. As far as I'm concerned, he clearly doesn't show it. He ignores it. Well, where do I fit? Pre-mill, post-mill, mill, um, somewhere within an eschatology. Even Heiser went to try and grapple with this whole eschatology thing and goes, it's best that we Christians stay out of figuring it out. Nobody has the answer on eschatology. No wonder they don't have an answer on eschatology, or people try to die on certain hills, because the expectations, it's so difficult, but it failed. Let's just put it point blank. And that's what the critical
Yeah.
scholarship shows. And it's like, man, I could literally just point out what you're doing, failed apocalyptic prophet. Millions of Christians or millions of Muslims are wanting to control you, and they want to usurp these sites and take it over for their religion. And it's like, that's exactly what your religion did and
It's
has done for 2000 years. Like, what do you mean? So it's hypocritical is what I called it in the
it's
video.
totally yeah. It's doing the it's committing the really the cardinal sin of attempting to do an internal critique, right? By basically all he's doing is he's picking at the worst parts of, you know, Islam as a
Mhm.
means to to lambast the whole thing while holding to only the best parts of
It's
his own Christianity,
right,
right?
right. That's true,
So,
and doesn't give them the opportunity to have. So yeah, I'm with you, and sure, I could find common ground. I mean, if we look at terrorism, and we talk about
yeah,
that, there's a track record here of extremist groups within this particular religion. We could talk about some of that, but like, I don't think he pays attention to the good people that are part of that religion and doesn't dwell on that enough, and yet doesn't realize the crap that's in his own. So, and I say crap because some of it to me is crap. We were talking about Ignatius earlier. I brought that up.
right,
Man, I
yeah,
think that's such crap to think of life that way. Like, I want to die. I was like, that's why I left this ideology. I couldn't negotiate and find Christianity even attractive when I read Paul and I see what he's saying and I see these words that seem pretty clear to me of what he's implying about this flesh being evil, and can't wait for this to end. I
totally,
experienced that,
yeah,
like, it's not
yeah,
a positive outlook psychologically on your body, on the
no,
world around you. Anyway, we're just
it,
going, aren't we?
I I think so.
I
It's time to
appreciate
shut
you.
it down, isn't it?
It is. Thanks for listening to me ramble there at the end. I love y'all.
Oh yeah,
Thank you. Love you, Kip. We got more
love it
coming,
too.
man.
All right.